Think you know prehistoric fashion? Think again. We're diving deep to debunk the biggest myths about what early humans actually wore. From ingenious material choices to surprising design features, you'll discover how necessity truly sparked a revolution in prehistoric style. Before there were cities or silk, before gold or glittering crowns, there was only ice. The world was cold, wide, and wild, and the people who walked it dressed, not for beauty, but for survival. Yet somehow, even then, they found ways to make survival beautiful. Tonight, we're re-traveling back to the Ice Age to see what fashion looked like when the world was frozen, and every stitch was a story. We'll explore the tools, the furs, the beads, and the quiet genius of the first humans who learned to turn cold into culture. If you enjoy falling asleep to slow stories about the strange corners of history, you're in the right place. Take a moment to subscribe to Boring History for Sleep. It helps more sleepy historians find their way here. Now, close your eyes. Imagine the firelight. Feel the chill just beyond its glow. Let's begin. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the world 20,000 years ago. The familiar map of continents was there, but everything else was different. Vast ice sheets pressed down upon the northern lands, grinding mountains into dust, swallowing valleys, and sealing rivers under glass. The air itself felt heavier, filled with a dry cold that cracked stone and bone alike. Across what would one day be Europe, Asia, and North America, the landscape stretched in shades of silver and pale blue, interrupted only by the dark thread of conifer forests clinging to the edges of survival. The Ice Age was not a single event, but a long, patient siege of the planet, and for thousands of years, human beings lived in its shadow. Life was small, intimate, and fragile. The world was too big, too empty, too cold to be owned by anyone. Yet, in this desolation, small groups of people carried warmth with them, the glow of a fire, the hush of shared breath in a cave, the muffled rhythm of feet wrapped in hide. Nights lasted for months. The sun rose late and lingered only briefly, a faint disk struggling behind thin clouds. To step outside the circle of firelight was to step into danger. The wind was alive, carving skin raw, burying footprints within minutes. To live in such a place demanded not only endurance, but imagination, the kind that turns animal hide into shelter and sinew into thread. The people who walked this frozen earth were both like us and utterly alien. Neanderthals had already faded into memory, leaving behind only their tools, their bones, and a faint echo of their presence in our DNA. The humans who remained our ancestors moved like quiet shadows between the glaciers. They knew the habits of every creature, the seasons of migration, the way ice sang before it cracked. To survive meant to listen carefully to the world, to understand its moods, and clothing, though simple in purpose, became the truest expression of that understanding. It was the line between life and death, between warmth and stillness, between being a creature of the earth and a maker within it. In the Ice Age, there were no looms, no spinning wheels, no cloth fluttering in the wind. Fabric meant flesh, hide, fur, and sinew. To clothe oneself was to take something from the world and reshape it. The earliest tailors were not designers, but hunters, tanners, and inventors. They worked with bone needles sharpened against flint, threading them with the long fibers of animal muscle. They softened hides with fat and smoke, kneaded them by hand until they were pliable, and then stitched them into something that could move with the body, not against it. Clothing wasn't just made, it was earned, through the long labor of the hunt and the even longer labor of transformation. The cold shaped everything, even beauty. You can imagine the scene, a small encampment of mammoth hunters on the tundra, smoke curling from a pit fire as a woman scrapes a reindeer hide, her hands rough but steady. Beside her, a child plays with a piece of ivory, carving tiny grooves with a shard of flint. A man returns from the distance, a dark figure against the pale light, his fur coat dusted with frost. Every part of that moment, every tool, every gesture, carries the quiet knowledge that warmth is temporary. Survival depends on layers, both literal and social. Fur on skin, skin against skin, people gathered close for heat. In this world, even the act of dressing became a kind of ritual, a daily prayer to endure. And yet, amid all that hardship, there was tenderness, the way a mother would wrap her child in a fox pelt, tucking the edges with care, the way beads made from ivory or shells were sewn into the edges of garments, not for function, but because they pleased the eye. the way red ochre was dusted onto hides, adding color to a colorless world. These were gestures that spoke of something more than survival. They spoke of awareness, of self, of beauty, of identity. To be human in the Ice Age was to know both hunger and art. The same hands that skinned an animal also carved ornaments to decorate it later. The same mind that feared the cold imagined ways to make life within it meaningful. When night fell, and in the Ice Age, night was almost a season unto itself. The world narrowed to the circle of light around the fire. The stars were clear and hard, the sky enormous. You might picture a small group huddled inside a hide-covered shelter, the fire throwing flickers across their faces. Outside, when you think of a designer, you might picture someone sketching on fabric in a quiet studio, surrounded by rolls of cloth and spools of thread. But the very first designers worked by firelight, kneeling on cold stone floors, their fingers stiff from the air. They had no scissors, no fabric, no measuring tape. Their materials were bone and skin, their tools were stone and sinew, and their runway was the frozen earth. Yet they were designers all the same, shaping what they had into what they needed, transforming nature into something almost elegant. In the Ice Age, design was not a luxury. It was a line between life and death, and those who mastered it gave their people the gift of survival. The first tailors were hunters, gatherers, parents, craftsmen, and artists rolled into one. Every piece of clothing began with a life taken, a reindeer brought down by a spear, a fox caught in a snare, a bird struck from the sky with a stone-tipped arrow. Nothing went to waste. Flesh became food, bones became tools, and hides became shelter for the body. But it wasn't enough to wrap a skin around your shoulders and call it clothing. Rawhide was stiff, heavy, and unyielding. To make it soft enough to wear, people had to learn how to tan, to treat the material so it became pliable. They used fat, brains, and smoke, rubbing them into the surface of the skin until it transformed from something that belonged to an animal into something that belonged to a human. That process, though simple in description, was a kind of alchemy. It required patience, intuition, and an understanding of materials that came only with time. You can picture one of these early designers, perhaps a woman with hair, bound in sinew and hands cracked from the cold, sitting beside a hide stretched across a frame. She works with a bone scraper, drawing it across the surface again and again, each pass removing a layer until the hide is soft and even. Around her, the sounds of the Ice Age hum quietly, the wind against the cave mouth, the pop of firewood, the distant murmur of others at work. She is shaping the future without knowing it. The invention of clothing was not just about protection. It was the birth of the idea that humans could improve upon nature, that we could alter the world to fit us, not just adapt ourselves to fit it. The first real evidence of clothing appears not in fabric, which vanishes with time, but in tools. Archaeologists have found bone awls and needles dating back more than 40,000 years, some polished to a delicate point and drilled with a tiny eye for thread. These objects, fragile and intricate, tell us that people were sewing, not merely tying or wrapping hides, but cutting and stitching them together with intent. The thread came from animal sinew, stripped from muscle and twisted tight. Each stitch bound together not just to pieces of material, but to moments in time, the hunt that provided the hide and the hand that turned it into warmth. It's easy to imagine the first person who made such a needle. Perhaps it was discovered by accident, a hunter sharpening a piece of bone until it splintered into a fine, thin shape. Perhaps someone realized that pushing it through a hide was easier than cutting with stone. However it happened, the needle became one of humanity's most powerful inventions. It allowed precision, it allowed repair, and it allowed creativity. For the first time, humans could shape what they wore to fit the body, not just drape it loosely. A sleeve could be cut to follow the arm. A hood could shield the head from wind. Boots could be stitched to hug the feet, preserving warmth. Each new idea was passed from hand to hand, refined, perfected, and carried across generations. We sometimes think of the Ice Age as a time of sameness, endless snow, endless cold. But in truth, it was a time of great variety. People lived from Spain to Siberia, and each region required its own kind of ingenuity. The first designers were environmental thinkers. They understood the language of weather and landscape. In the open tundra, they made heavy parkas of reindeer hide, thick and layered, resistant to wind. In the forested south, lighter garments of deerskin allowed movement through trees. Where mammoths still roamed, their dense fur provided the ultimate insulation, a coat of ancient strength. These choices were not arbitrary. They were experiments in adaptation, the earliest examples of fashion as technology. And yet, even in their practicality, these clothes carried something personal. No two garments were quite alike. A stitch might curve differently, a bead might mark the hem, a cut might follow the maker's own idea of balance. In some ways, the Ice Age tailor was also an artist, guided by the rhythm of necessity but drawn to the beauty of order. When you have so little, when the world gives you only bone, stone, and hide, the way you use them becomes an expression of identity. A line of red pigment along a collar, a fringe cut to move in the wind, a row of tiny shells sewn into a cuff. These details might seem small, but they are what make us human. The desire to add meaning, to make even survival beautiful. It's worth pausing to think about how this all began. The moment someone first imagined clothing as something that could be made, not just found. Before that, early humans likely used simple wrappings, the pelts of animals tied with vines, or rough furs draped around the body. But as their hands grew more skilled, as their minds grew more curious, they began to shape the hides intentionally. They cut holes for arms, shaped seams to fit the shoulder, invented the idea of layers. A single discovery that sewing could join two pieces of hide changed everything. It allowed flexibility, it allowed design, it allowed comfort. In those first stitches, humanity took a quiet but enormous step toward civilization. One of the oldest known examples of this craftsmanship comes from Sungir, a burial site in what is now Russia. There, archaeologists found two children buried side by side, their bodies dressed in garments covered with more than 10,000 beads made from mammoth ivory. Each bead had been carefully drilled and polished, then sewn onto the clothing with precision. The work would have taken thousands of hours. These were not simple hunting clothes. They were ceremonial, symbolic, perhaps a sign of love or grief. Whoever made them poured time and devotion into every detail. To sew thousands of beads onto a single outfit in a world where every moment was spent chasing warmth and food. That is the mark of designers. People who saw in clothing not just utility, but meaning. What might those garments have looked like in life? Picture the children lying in the flicker of firelight, their coats gleaming faintly with ivory. The beads catch the glow, soft and pale, like snowflakes frozen in mid-air. Around them, the camp would have been hushed. The adults kneel, heads bowed. Perhaps they remember the laughter of those children, the sound of their footsteps in the snow. The garments are not just decoration, they are memory made visible. The first designers were not only creating clothing, they were preserving stories. Every stitch, every bead, every cut was a gesture of care, a way to hold on to something fleeting in a world where so much was lost to cold and time. As human groups spread and evolved, so did their designs. In one region, people learned to twist plant fibers into thread, experimenting with the idea of weaving. In another, they mixed ochre and animal fat to stain hides in shades of red and brown. Across the frozen steppe, hunters began wearing layered garments that could be adjusted as they moved from the open plains into the shelter of caves. Fashion, in its earliest form, was already becoming dynamic, a dialogue between human need and human imagination. The first designers didn't just copy nature, they studied it, borrowed from it, and then reshaped it in their own image. You can almost sense their pride in small things. The satisfaction of cutting a hide cleanly with a flint blade, the quiet joy of pulling a needle through a seam and seeing it hold, the calm rhythm of creation beside a fire, with the snow falling outside. There was beauty in the repetition, in the scrape, the stitch, the sigh. These were people who lived without excess, and yet they understood the pleasure of craft. They knew that to make something with your hands is to take part in a conversation with time. The garments they made would outlast them, passed down from one generation to the next, softening, fading, changing, but never truly gone. The idea of the designer as we know it today, someone who blends imagination and utility, began right there, in those early workshops of hide and smoke. These were the first creators who looked at the raw materials of the world and saw potential. A reindeer's tendon was not just meat, it was thread. A mammoth's tusk was not just ivory, it was ornament. They were rethinking their environment, shaping it to match their inner world. In that sense, the Ice Age tailor was both engineer and artist. the ancestor of every craftsman, every maker, every person who has ever looked at something ordinary and imagined what else it could become. What's remarkable is how much emotion we can still feel from their work, even across tens of thousands of years. When archaeologists unearth a tiny bone needle, its point still sharp. It carries the echo of the hand that shaped it. When they find traces of red pigment on a hide, they are seeing the fingerprints of someone who wanted to make life more colorful, even in a world of gray. These fragments remind us that creativity is not a product of comfort or abundance. It's a survival instinct. The colder the world became, the more inventive humans grew. The first designers weren't working for admiration or applause. They were working for life, and in doing so, they created beauty by accident. As the centuries passed, techniques spread. Sewing became second nature. Young people learned by watching elders. Every community developed its own methods. The way they cut, the way they tied, the way they stitched. Some preferred spiral seams, others straight overlaps. Some tanned hides with smoke, others with oil. These small distinctions were the beginnings of culture. Regional styles born from necessity, but infused with individuality. What someone wore could reveal where they came from, what they hunted, even who they were. Identity, for the first time, began to take shape, not just through speech or ritual, but through design. And so, beneath the silence of the Ice Age sky, humanity grew more complex. The firelight workshops became the first studios, the hides became the first canvases, the tailors, without knowing it, became the first storytellers. Each garment they made whispered something about the people who wore it, about their lives, their fears, their endurance. Every stitch was an act of hope. Every completed coat, a small victory against extinction. The Ice Age would not last forever, but the habits it forged would shape everything that came after. Even today, when we pull a thread through fabric or choose a color that feels like us, we are repeating gestures born beside those ancient fires. In the end, the first designers did more than protect the body. They taught humanity how to imagine itself. They turned necessity into beauty, raw nature into art, and as the cold winds swept across the endless plains, those small acts of creation became a kind of defiance, proof that even in a frozen, hostile world, we could still make something warm, something ours, something human. Before there were scissors or needles, before buttons or buckles, there were stones and bones and the patient rhythm of hands, learning how to make something last. Imagine sitting in the half-light of a shelter carved into a cliff, the wind whispering just beyond the opening, a small fire murmuring beside you. The flames dance low, licking at the air, casting golden ripples across the curved wall. In your lap lies a strip of hide, thick and stubborn, smelling faintly of smoke and the animal it once belonged to. The air is cool, the season harsh. Outside, the world is white and silent. But in here, you are making something not only for warmth, but for survival. The first fashion tools weren't elegant. They were rough-edged, improvised, often discovered by accident. A sharp flake chipped from flint could slice through hide if handled right. A rib bone, polished and pierced, could coax fibers through thick fur. Ice Age people didn't have a workshop, but they had imagination, and that was enough. They would sit in groups, perhaps under reindeer skins, stretched across wooden poles, sorting through bits of bone and ivory, testing edges, carving grooves, shaping tools with the same patience used to shape their world. Archaeologists have found the earliest sewing needles in Siberia, slender pieces of bird bone, drilled carefully to create an eye. These date back roughly 40,000 years. Think about that. While the rest of the world was still shivering through the Pleistocene, someone, maybe a woman, sitting near a fire, took a fragment of wing bone and decided to turn it into something delicate and purposeful. It wasn't a spear or an axe or a scraper. It was a tool of creation. With that needle, she could make clothes that fit better, lasted longer, and kept her family alive through the coldest nights. The process wasn't fast. Every stitch was a small act of concentration. The needle had to be smooth enough to pass through the hide, yet strong enough not to break. The thread was usually made from sinew, the fibrous tissue pulled from the backs and legs of animals. It was tough, flexible, and when dried and twisted, surprisingly fine. They would run it through their teeth to soften it, roll it against their thighs, and feed it through the eye of the bone needle. Then, with slow precision, they'd begin to sew. The motion must have been soothing in, pulled tight, out again, a rhythm as ancient as breath. The toolkit of an Ice Age tailor was simple but ingenious. There were scrapers made of stone or antler for cleaning hides, awls, sharp-pointed tools used to punch holes, blades for trimming, hammerstones for softening, and needles for joining pieces together. Some had small decorative touches, a carved line, a smooth curve, as though their makers couldn't resist leaving a signature. These were personal items, treasured as much as any weapon. Losing your sewing tools could mean losing your protection against the winter. You can imagine how carefully they were stored. A bundle wrapped in hide, tucked into a pouch, carried from camp to camp. Every nomadic group would have a few people who were especially skilled at working hides. The early tailors of the Ice Age, they might have known how to read the texture of reindeer skin, how to thin mammoth hide without tearing it, how to join furs so that the seams didn't leak cold air. Their knowledge wasn't written down, of course. It was passed hand to hand, eye to eye, gesture to gesture. A child watching their mother pierce holes in a fox pelt. A teenager learning how to shape a needle from bird bone. A grandmother teaching which sinews twist strongest when wet. Over generations, this became its own quiet art form, invisible to history, but foundational to civilization. If you were to handle one of those tools now, you'd be struck by how small and fragile they seem. The needles, especially, are no longer than your little finger, and yet they represent one of humanity's greatest leaps in skill. They turned raw nature into tailored protection. They allowed people to move north into harsher climates. They made it possible to craft parkas, leggings, and boots that sealed out wind and snow. Without those tools, the great Ice Age migrations from Europe into Asia, from Siberia into the Americas, might never have happened. Think of that for a moment. The world's first great expansion of humanity wasn't driven by armies or empires, but by tailors, by people who learned how to stitch. It's a strangely comforting thought. Our survival didn't depend only on strength or hunting ability, but on patience, craftsmanship, and care. Those who sewed, in their quiet way, held civilization together, literally, thread by thread. Of course, not all tools were for practical use. Some were made for beauty. Archaeologists have uncovered bone awls carved with tiny geometric designs, or handles shaped like animals. One in particular, found in France, bears the image of a reindeer etched delicately along its side. Imagine someone sitting by firelight, taking extra time to carve that reindeer into the toolless surface, not because it made the awl sharper, but because it made it meaningful. Maybe the reindeer was part of a story or a dream. Maybe it was a way of saying thank you to the creature whose hide would soon become clothing. Decoration had purpose, too. A beautifully carved tool was more than an object. It was a companion. These were not disposable things. They were extensions of the hand, imbued with care and personality. A tailor might have known every nick and curve of their favorite scraper, the same way a musician knows their instrument. Over time, the handles grew smooth with touch. They carried the warmth of their user. When that person died, their tools might have been buried with them, placed near the hands, ready for the next world. Working with these materials wasn't easy. Hides had to be scraped, soaked, stretched, dried, and smoked before they were usable. This process could take days. First, the hide would be pegged out on the ground, or over a wooden frame, first side down, using sharp stones or bone scrapers. Every bit of flesh and fat had to be removed, a tiring, smelly task that demanded strength and patience. Then came the softening. Some groups used animal brains, mixed with water, to create a kind of natural conditioner. The fatty acids in the brain helped break down the hide fibers, making them supple. The saying, "every animal has just enough brains to tan its own hide," was probably true, even back then. After softening came smoking, not for preservation, but for waterproofing. Hides were hung over a smoky fire, absorbing the scent and oils of the wood. The result was a rich, earthy tone, and a texture that could resist moisture. Each step left its mark on the final garment. A well-tanned reindeer hide had a silvery sheen, while mammoth skin, though rare, was thick and almost rubbery. Fox, or lynx fur, used for trimming, offered softness against the skin. In time, people learned to combine materials, layering hides for warmth, stitching fur inward or outward depending on the weather. The toolkit evolved with these techniques, and so did the skill behind it. There's something deeply human about this process. The repetition, the quiet focus, the blending of necessity and artistry. It is easy to imagine the atmosphere in one of those Ice Age shelters. the steady rasp of scraping, the smell of smoke and fat, the gentle murmur of voices, children playing with scraps of fur, someone humming softly while threading a needle. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was intimate, essential, and shared. We sometimes think of the Ice Age as cold and brutal, and it was, but within that harshness there was also warmth, not just from the furs, but from the act of making them. Every stitch held a little intention: protect, preserve, endure. In that way, tailoring became more than a craft. It was a language of care. And in this slow evolution of tools, you can trace the origins of everything we wear today. The awl became the needle, the scraper became the knife, the sinew became thread, the tailor's pouch of bone tools became the sewing kit, the fashion workshop, the garment factory. But the spirit, that quiet, patient making, has never really changed. We still cut and stitch. We still shape material to fit our bodies. We still express meaning through what we wear. The Ice Age tailor might not recognize our fabrics or machines, but they would understand the impulse perfectly. In some ancient campsites, archaeologists have found piles of broken needles. It's a strangely moving sight, a scatter of thin bones, each once used to hold the world together. The fragments tell their own story, of trial and error, of persistence. For every finished garment, there were many attempts. Every sharp snap of a needle would have been met with a sigh, a pause, maybe a muttered curse. But the work continued. That determination, that refusal to give up, is what defines us as a species. When night fell, and the last glow of the fire flickered against the cave walls, the tailor's toolkit would be laid aside. The tools would rest beside the sleeping forms of those who depended on them. In the morning, they'd be picked up again. The same motions repeated, the same soft rhythm of creation. Over days, months, years, those movements shaped not just clothing, but culture. So when you picture the Ice Age, don't just imagine hunters with spears or mammoths trudging through snow. Picture too, the quieter scenes, the human ones, the hands working by firelight, the small bundle of tools, worn smooth by use, the invisible threads that connected one life to another, one generation to the next. That was the true foundation of fashion. It didn't begin with luxury or beauty, but with endurance, with skill, with love stitched into every seam. And as the world grew colder and people ventured farther into the frozen edges of the earth, their survival depended more than ever on the humble magic of that toolkit, the needle, the scraper, the sinew, and the steady hands that used them. The first true outfit was not made for beauty. It was made for movement, for survival in a landscape where the cold could kill in minutes, and the hunt meant everything. If you close your eyes and imagine an Ice Age morning, it begins in silence. The world is a field of white and grey, a wind sweeping low over frozen plains. The sun barely lifts above the horizon, pale and cold. In that half-light, a small group of figures stirs near a ring of smoke. The hunters rise before dawn, when the snow is still hard and the tracks are clear. They move quietly, the crunch of their boots muffled beneath layers of fur. Every piece of their clothing has a purpose. Their boots are made from reindeer hide, the hair turned inward for warmth. The soles are thick, cut from the tougher skin of mammoth or bison, stitched carefully with sinew to keep out moisture. Around their legs are leggings of tanned hide, bound with strips of leather so the snow won't creep in. Their tunics are layered, inner shirts of softer fur, outer coats of thick hide, the fur turned outward to block the wind. A hood draws close around the face, trimmed with fox or wolf fur to catch the warmth of the breath before it freezes. Nothing is left to chance. Every seam is thought through, every gap closed. The hunter's clothing was their armor, against the cold, against the wind, even against the world itself. They learned early that a well-made parka could mean the difference between life and death. A garment wasn't just worn, it was trusted. It had to move with the body, flex at the joints, hold warmth even when damp with melted snow. To test new clothes, some hunters might walk into the night wind and stand still, feeling for where the cold found its way through. A gap near the wrist, a thin patch at the shoulder. These details mattered more than decoration ever could. Still, even in these practical designs, there was beauty. The best tailored pieces had symmetry, balance, and proportion that seemed almost instinctive. Hunters knew how to drape hides so the fur lay smooth, how to curve seams to fit the human form. The silhouette of an Ice Age hunter was graceful, layered yet sleek, the lines of fur and hide following the motion of muscle and bone. It was fashion in its oldest form, where form follows function, and function becomes an art. When a hunt was planned, the clothing changed. Lighter garments were worn when tracking fast animals, heavier ones for long waits in snowdrifts. Gloves were lined with moss or feathers. Faces were smeared with fat to guard against frostbite. Every clan had its preferences. Some favored hoods shaped long like snouts. Others wrapped the lower face in scarves of woven grass or sinew cord. Across the steppes and valleys, people were inventing regional styles without ever knowing it. To see this world clearly, you have to imagine texture. The swish of fur against fur, the soft creak of frozen hide as it bends, the faint jingling of bone pendants tied to a hunter's belt, charms for luck, a reindeer antler knife tucked into a sheath, a pouch at the hip filled with dried meat. These weren't mere accessories, they were extensions of the self. A hunter's outfit was a map of their life, a record of skill and success. The more experienced you were, the better your clothing showed it. A well-dressed hunter wasn't vain, they were respected. Their furs told stories. Sometimes those stories were literal. Etched patterns or dyed lines ran across a sleeve or hood, markings of ownership, of tribe, of memory. These early decorations weren't purely ornamental. They were symbols, messages passed through generations. A zigzag might mean water, or the memory of a river where a great hunt had taken place. A spiral could represent wind, or a family totem. To wear those signs was to carry identity on your body, but to make such garments, one needed both patience and partnership. The hunter may have brought back the hides, but others, often women, transformed them. The clothing of the hunter was a collective creation. Around the hearth, hides were softened, cut, stitched, and assembled. Each person might specialize, one good with scraping, another with sewing, another with fitting the final pieces together. The process could take days, sometimes weeks. A coat made from reindeer skins, properly fitted and decorated, was a kind of masterpiece, part necessity, part pride. To us, these garments might seem crude, but to those who wore them, they were as sophisticated as any tailored suit. The seams were waterproofed with animal fat or resin. The edges were reinforced with strips of tendon. Even the fur direction was considered. On hoods, the hairs faced downward to shed snow. On boots, upward for warmth. Nothing was random. It was engineering disguised as art. There is a quiet poetry to the way the hunter dressed, a dialogue between human and animal, between life and the cold that surrounded it. To wear fur was not only to protect oneself, but to carry a fragment of another creature's strength. A wolf's pelt gave not just warmth, but a sense of stealth and spirit. A reindeer hide was prized for its endurance, its lightness, its quiet movement through brush and snow. Hunters knew these qualities intimately. They didn't wear clothing the way we do now, as something separate from the body. They wore it as though it were part of them. And yet, even in this practical world, style emerged. Certain tribes favored high collars, others long sleeves that narrowed at the wrist. Some hoods had fur tassels that trailed behind like tails, not because they served a function, but because they pleased the eye. Ornamentation crept in wherever there was time and comfort enough to allow it. A hunter's belt might be lined with shells or carved teeth, polished smooth by touch. Some wore small beads made from ivory, drilled with infinite patience. Each addition told a small story, a successful hunt, a gift from a loved one, a token of courage. It's easy to imagine the ritual of dressing for a hunt. Before dawn, in the dim glow of embers, the group gathers. One by one, they pull on their layers. The weight of the garments settles over them like calm armor. The air outside is freezing, but inside, the warmth of shared purpose fills the shelter. A final check of weapons, a quiet nod between companions. The world outside is silent and wide, waiting. As they step out into the snow, the wind greets them sharply. It howls around the rocks and sweeps across the open plain. The hunters lower their hoods, hunch their shoulders, and press on. Each movement is measured. The cold nips at the eyes, the breath clouds the air, yet they are ready. Their clothing makes them almost part of the landscape, moving shapes of fur and leather, indistinguishable from the creatures they pursue. In this moment, the line between human and environment blurs. The hunter's clothing becomes a bridge between the two. The relationship between hunter and tailor was one of quiet dependence. Without skilled garment makers, there would be no hunt, no survival. And without the hunter, there would be no material to work with. It was a loop of trust, Perhaps there were small rituals before a hunt, a tailor pressing a charm into a sleeve, whispering a blessing for warmth and luck. Perhaps a hunter, returning with fresh hides, laid them reverently before those who would transform them. Every pelt carried a story, and every stitch extended it. Some Ice Age clothing remnants discovered in graves tell us just how much care went into these garments. One, found in Siberia, had intricate stitching, hundreds of tiny, even holes, each made with a fine needle. Another had traces of red ochre, as if the seams had been tinted with earth pigments. There's beauty in that detail, the idea that even in death, one was dressed with dignity, wrapped in the warmth of human effort and craft. Clothing also defined roles. The hunter's outfit was heavier, layered for endurance. Those who stayed near camp wore lighter wraps, often draped loosely for movement. Children's clothes were made from softer furs, cut generously to allow for growth. And for the elders, garments were lined and doubled. The fur turned inward for comfort. Clothing was not only about survival, it reflected care, hierarchy, and love. The hunter's wardrobe changed with the seasons. In late spring, lighter hides replaced heavy winter coats. Reindeer skins were prized for being warm yet breathable. In summer, people might wear only simple wraps of softened leather or woven plant fibers. But even then, they carried the marks of craft, braided edges, colored threads, shells tied for sound. When the world turned cold again, heavier pieces came out of storage, repaired and smoked anew. There was a rhythm to it, a cycle that followed the Earth's own pulse. In the deeper winters, when snow lay heavy and the days were short, clothing took on an almost spiritual importance. To dress a hunter for the cold was to prepare them for battle, not against other men, but against nature itself. And each return, each successful hunt, reaffirmed that ancient balance. The hunter brought back food and hides. The tailors transformed them. The people endured another season. We sometimes forget that fashion, at its root, was about community. Every stitch, every scrap of fur, told a story of shared effort. The hunter's coat was the sum of many hands, the one who tracked the animal, the one who tanned the hide, the one who cut, the one who sewed, the one who tied the last knot. It was collective artistry, woven through necessity. When you picture an Ice Age hunter now, standing on a ridge, snow blowing around their legs, spear in hand, try to see beyond the weapon. Look at the clothes, the fit, the texture, the craftsmanship. Each line is a lesson in adaptation. Each layer is an echo of the hands that made it. Fashion, in that frozen world, was not luxury. It was life, shaped by wind, by ice, by the heartbeat of survival itself. And when night came and the hunters returned, they would strip off their frozen coats, hang them by the fire to dry, and sit close, the smell of smoke and fur thick in the air. The garments steamed and softened, releasing the day's cold. Someone might run a finger along a seam, checking for where another would begin to patch a small tear, sinew ready in hand. The work never ended, but neither did the warmth that came from it. That was Ice Age fashion at its purest, the clothing of the hunter. Functional, beautiful, born from the rhythm of necessity, and shaped by the artistry of survival. Even in the harshest winters, even in a world ruled by glaciers and wind, Ice Age people found a way to express themselves beyond survival. Clothing was their first line of defense against the cold, but adornment was their first whisper of individuality, a soft voice that said, "I exist. I am here. I am more than merely alive." Imagine a quiet evening in a hidden cave. The fire's glow flickering across walls etched with stories of hunts, animals, and human hands. Around the hearth, people sit cross-legged on furs, working with small tools and tiny fragments of bone, shell, and ivory. Their fingers are cold, stiffened by smoke and wind, yet precise, moving with an almost musical rhythm. This is the beginning of identity, made by hand, stitched into every seam, etched into every bead, and colored with the earth's pigments. Adornment was never frivolous. Every piece had meaning, though not always obvious to us. Shells drilled and strung into necklaces might signify family, status, or achievement. Animal teeth sewn into belts could represent skill in the hunt, a kind of tally of the kills and triumphs that allowed the clan to survive. Beads, often painstakingly shaped from ivory, were sewn onto hides, not simply for decoration, but to convey a story, a lineage, or a ritual purpose. The same techniques that protected the body from frost also became the canvas for expression. Each stitch, each hole punched in a hide, could hold in tension a heartbeat frozen in time. Consider a young hunter returning from a successful chase, his coat layered with reindeer hide, boots tightly stitched, hood fastened to shield against snow. Across the seams, tiny beads gleam faintly in the firelight. Perhaps he has earned the right to wear them, a symbol of his growing skill, a signal to others that he has crossed a threshold into maturity. Those beads are more than adornment. They are language. Even in a world without written words, humans found ways to mark themselves, to communicate achievements, to differentiate themselves. Color, too, played a quiet role. Red ochre, yellow clay, or black charcoal could be applied to hides, bones, and fur. Sometimes, it traced patterns on garments, dots along a sleeve, zigzags across a hood. Subtle, deliberate, meaningful. Imagine a woman dipping a small brush of compressed ochre into fat, carefully marking the edges of a child's coat. She works in silence, aware that these marks might bring protection, favor, or recognition. The pigment soaks into the fibers of the hide, enduring long after the fire dies, a lasting signature of the person who applied it. Adornment also bridged the sacred and the practical. Amulets and charms were sewn into clothing or hung from belts. They might carry power believed to protect the wearer during hunts, during travel across icy plains, or in encounters with dangerous animals. Some were simple, a tiny carved bone, a polished tooth. Others were elaborate, intricately carved figurines or pendants, shaped like the creatures that sustained the community: mammoths, reindeer, foxes, or birds. Each ornament, delicate or substantial, was both protective and expressive, a blend of artistry and belief. In the caves of Europe and Siberia, archaeologists have uncovered examples of these early adornments. One burial at Dolní Vlastánec in the Czech Republic contained thousands of beads sewn onto garments. Each bead, painstakingly shaped from mammoth ivory, would have taken hours to drill, polish, and attach. That level of dedication suggests more than practical necessity. It shows the human desire to create, to leave a mark, to embody identity in something tangible. Clothing and decoration became intertwined, forming an early language of social communication. Adornment also distinguished groups and communities. In a vast frozen landscape, clothing could signal belonging. Certain stitching patterns, bead arrangements, or pigments might indicate membership in a tribe or clan. It could mark alliances or kinship, an unspoken understanding among people spread across wide distances. Even the choice of animal hide might carry cultural significance. Some groups prized reindeer, others fox, others wolf. Each selection reflected not only the resources of the land but also the values, priorities, and identity of those who wore it. The integration of adornment with practical clothing created a kind of dual purpose. A hunter's coat was warm and protective, yes, but the embellishments elevated it into a declaration. This is who I am. This is my place in the world. These are my achievements and my tribe. Even children, dressed in carefully layered furs with small beads along the edges, were learning these lessons, seeing, absorbing, understanding that identity could be expressed in what one wears. Through clothing, the Ice Age people were teaching culture, social rules, and continuity across generations. Adornment extended beyond garments. Tools and weapons often carried symbolic decoration. A spear might have etched lines along its shaft. A knife's handle could be carved with geometric patterns or animal motifs. When combined with clothing, these tools became part of. The first lesson was observation. Hunters needed to understand the textures and properties of the animals they pursued. Reindeer hides were prized for warmth and lightness. Their dense under for trapping heat while remaining flexible for movement. Mammoth hides, rarer but invaluable, offered durability and strength, perfect for the outer layers of coats or boots. Foxes and lynxes provided soft furs for lining hoods, collars, and gloves, keeping the skin close to the body from freezing. Even birds contributed feathers for insulation, woven into caps or sewn into lining for extreme cold. Every material was studied, how it stretched, how it responded to moisture, how it could be shaped and stitched into something wearable. Knowledge of these qualities was passed down carefully, often orally, through demonstration and by repetition, so that each generation understood the subtle differences that determined life or death. Harvesting these materials required skill and patience. Killing the animal was only the beginning. Preparing its body to become clothing was a careful, time-consuming ritual. The hide had to be separated from the flesh, with scrapers made of flint or antler, a process that demanded precision to avoid tearing. Once freed, the hide needed cleaning. The remaining fat and membrane scraped away, the fur brushed and straightened. Then came tanning, the process that transformed fragile raw skin into supple, long-lasting material. Early humans discovered that using natural substances, the brains of the animal itself, water, smoke, or plant oils, softened hides without making them stiff or brittle. Over time, this process became both practical and artful, leaving hides smooth, strong, and pliable, ready to be shaped into the clothing that would shield them from relentless winters. Hair, too, was valued in a very practical sense. It provided insulation in layers, helping trap warmth close to the body. Inner fur, like the fine undercoat of reindeer or the soft down of certain birds, was often sewn facing inward, directly against the skin, while coarser outer fur faced outward, repelling wind and moisture. Hunters learned to mix textures, layering thick hides with soft furs, combining the properties of multiple animals to create garments that were surprisingly sophisticated. Each combination reflected knowledge accumulated over generations, the result of trial, error, and careful observation of nature. It wasn't only about warmth, mobility mattered. Clothing had to bend with the body, not hinder it. A hunter climbing a rocky ridge or stalking prey across frozen tundra could not afford stiff, cumbersome garments. The right combination of fur, hide, and hair created flexibility as well as protection. Sleeves and legs were cut to allow movement. Hoods were shaped to shield against wind but not restrict sight. Boots were carefully formed to endure long marches without blistering or freezing the toes. To modern eyes, these garments may seem crude, but they were carefully engineered for the specific needs of survival. Every material, every cut, every seam reflected the intimate knowledge of human anatomy and the behavior of animals. Some groups even learned to prepare and weave hair and sinew into cords and threads for sewing. Sinew, pulled from muscles and tendons, was naturally strong and elastic. When dried and twisted, it became a fine thread, able to hold together layers of hide that might otherwise fall apart. Hair, too, could be plaited into strings or braided into patterns for decoration or practical binding. Combining sinew and hair required dexterity, threading needles, piercing holes, and tying knots. Yet the results were durable, waterproof, and enduring, a testament to the ingenuity of the Ice Age tailor. The selection of materials often reflected social and cultural nuances. Some furs and hides were reserved for elders or skilled hunters, while softer or less durable skins might be used for children. The color and pattern of fur also mattered. Spotted lynx hides might indicate a special rank or a ceremonial purpose, while more common hides served practical needs. Pigments could be applied to alter or enhance the visual effect of the material, introducing patterns, symbols, or clan markings. In this way, material choice itself became a form of expression, a subtle code woven into the clothing that could communicate identity, skill, or affiliation without uttering a word. In addition to practical clothing, small fragments of hair and fur were sometimes used for adornment. Thin strips could be braided into belts or headbands. Soft tufts might be sewn into hoods or collars as trimming. Animal hair could even be used as stuffing for gloves or padding inside boots. These innovations weren't frivolous. They demonstrated a deep understanding of the material and an ability to manipulate it for both comfort and utility. The Ice Age people were, in a very real sense, inventing fashion out of necessity, a language of material mastery that would evolve slowly over tens of thousands of years. Even the smallest remnants were valued. Archaeologists have found scraps of fur and hide, carefully preserved in frozen soils, with evidence of tiny, precise stitching. Each fragment tells a story of attention, care, and skill. To imagine a person working on these scraps is to feel their patience and presence. The fur smoothed, the hide stretched, the sinew threaded, each stitch deliberate, each movement purposeful. Clothing was not simply thrown together. It was composed like a work of music, rhythmically and carefully, echoing the life of the maker. The interplay between function and beauty is also evident in how materials were combined. Coats might pair coarse outer hides with fine, soft underlayers. Linings of fox fur added warmth and comfort. Edges could be trimmed with feathers, adding both style and protection. Layering itself became a technique, not just for insulation but for expression. Different textures, colors, and qualities of material created subtle distinctions, allowing wearers to distinguish themselves while still surviving in the same environment. In colder regions, innovations were even more remarkable. Some peoples learned to stitch together multiple hides into complex garments that covered the entire body, from head to toe. These ensembles often included mittens, leggings, boots, and hoods, all carefully tailored to seal the body from snow and wind. Even the interior lining was considered soft, insulating, and shaped to move naturally with the wearer. Each layer, each seam, represented the culmination of decades, perhaps centuries, of accumulated knowledge about materials, climate, and human anatomy. Material selection also influenced social rituals. Certain furs might be worn only for ceremonial events, hunting celebrations, or rites of passage. The choice of hide, the quality of the hair, and the way it was treated could carry meaning beyond practicality. In this way, clothing created a subtle form of social structure. Those who wore rare or difficult to obtain materials might hold status or authority. Every person's garments could therefore serve as both armor against the elements and a badge of identity, skill, or achievement. The tactile quality of materials mattered profoundly. Imagine running your fingers over the thick, velvety underfur of a reindeer coat, the stiff, protective outer hide, and the delicate softness of fox trimming. Each sensation was deliberate, a consideration for both comfort and function. Hunters and tailors of the Ice Age understood these subtleties intuitively. The choice of material, the way it was treated and stitched, was a dialogue between human need and natural resource, between environment and ingenuity. Even hair, often overlooked today, played a critical role. Long strands from animals could be braided or woven into cords for binding garments, creating flexible ties that didn't fray or break easily. Shorter hair could provide insulation or be worked into decorative patterns, giving garments a texture and visual depth that carried meaning. The manipulation of hair was labor-intensive, requiring care, patience, and an understanding of the physical properties of each type of fiber. In this way, hair became both functional and symbolic, bridging the gap between survival and expression. Some communities developed regional specialties based on available materials. Siberian hunters favored thick reindeer hides, while in parts of Europe, softer furs like lynx or fox were used extensively. Materials were adapted to climate, availability, and tradition, creating a diversity of techniques and styles. Even in an era without formal education or written instruction, knowledge of materials spread through observation, imitation, and oral transmission. The Ice Age tailor was both scientist and artist, a master of texture, temperature, and tactile design. In sum, fur, hide, and hair were the foundation of Ice Age fashion. They provided warmth, protection, and mobility. They carried social, cultural, and symbolic meaning. They allowed humans to survive in some of the harshest climates on Earth, while expressing individuality, status, and identity. Every stitch, every layer, every careful treatment of material reflected a deep understanding of the natural world, a tactile literacy that modern humans can scarcely imagine. When night fell and the hunters returned to their shelters, these materials would continue to breathe life into their world. Hides were hung near the fire to dry, fur softened by warmth, hair braided into decorative patterns. Every piece, whether part of a coat, boot, or hood, told a story of labor, skill, and care. The cold outside might howl endlessly, but within the shelter, humans had transformed the raw, unforgiving world into something protective, meaningful, and enduring. The legacy of these materials is profound. Fur, hide, and hair were more than survival tools. They were the very beginnings of fashion, a language of adaptation and identity that would evolve over millennia. Every coat, every boot, every braid of sinew and hair was a testament to human creativity, resilience, and the instinct to leave a mark on the world. And so, in the quiet hush of the Ice Age night, the materials themselves became storytellers, whispering the lives, struggles, and ingenuity of those who wore them. In the frozen expanses of the Ice Age, survival depended not just on skill with a spear or knowledge of animal tracks, but on the intimate understanding of warmth and movement, of how multiple layers of fur, hide, and hair could be combined into a single living garment. Imagine the early morning in a windswept valley, the snow sparkling faintly in pale light, A small figure moves deliberately near the smoke curling from a shelter. Each motion is careful, almost ritualistic, because the garments they are about to assemble are far more than clothing. They are the thin line between life and death. Layering was the central art of Ice Age fashion, a silent, patient technique refined over generations. The principle was simple in theory, but complex in execution. Multiple layers, each with a distinct purpose, working together to trap warmth, shed moisture, and allow freedom of movement. At the innermost level, a soft underlayer protected the skin from friction and cold. This layer might be made from the fine underfur of reindeer or fox, the short, dense fibers catching the warmth of the body and preventing direct contact with rougher materials. It was light, pliable, and intimate. The Ice Age tailor understood that the choice of this layer could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. The very first garments worn against the skin were delicate, carefully tanned, and stitched with the smallest sinew threads, each stitch a tiny promise of protection. Over this foundational layer, thicker hides were added for insulation. A reindeer hide, stretched and tanned, could be tailored into a tunic or coat, forming a shield against wind and snow. The outer surface might be rough and stiff, acting as armor against the elements, while the inner side worked in harmony with the underlayer to trap heat. Layers were not merely stacked, they were thoughtfully integrated. Seams were staggered, edges overlapped, and joints reinforced to minimize exposure. Ice Age humans discovered through trial and error that a single, thick layer was insufficient. The genius of layering lay in balance, in how different textures and densities worked together to create warmth without restricting movement. Hoods were a critical component of this layered system. The head loses heat more quickly than any other part of the body, and in the icy winds of the tundra, a poorly protected head could lead to death within hours. Hoods were carefully shaped from furs and hides, often lined with soft underfur and trimmed with longer guard hairs. Some hoods extended to cover the neck and shoulders, forming a cocoon of protection, while still allowing vision and the ability to breathe freely. The edges might be reinforced with sinew or braided strips of hide, ensuring they maintained their shape and effectiveness over repeated use. Inside the hood, small adjustments could be made, a strip of fur folded just so to block a draft, or a layer of moss tucked in for extra insulation. Each modification reflected intimate knowledge of how air and heat moved around the body. Hands and feet required special attention in the layering process. Mittens were often constructed as a double layer, an inner glove of soft fur, stitched snugly to fit the hand, and an outer shell of thicker hide to resist wind and moisture. Some designs even included separate finger compartments for dexterity, allowing hunters to hold tools or weapons without sacrificing warmth. Boots were similarly complex, sometimes combining multiple hides for sole, upper, and lining, shaped to follow the contours of the foot and stitched carefully to prevent gaps. The process of assembling these layers required skill, foresight, and a steady hand, and mistakes could be fatal. Layering also took into account the rhythm of human activity. A hunter preparing for a long trek across snow-covered plains might add additional layers to withstand the cold of waiting, standing still for hours tracking animals. Those traveling more lightly or moving quickly might wear fewer layers to maintain agility, but still retain enough warmth to prevent frostbite. Clothing became dynamic, responsive to activity and environment, rather than static or uniform. The Ice Age tailor had to anticipate movement, temperature shifts, and the physical demands of survival, designing garments that balanced protection and mobility in ways modern synthetic fabrics still aspire to emulate. Sewing techniques played a crucial role in the effectiveness of layering. Each layer had to be joined precisely, often with sinew, ensuring that the seams were durable yet flexible. The needle, often carved from bone and meticulously sharpened, allowed for small, tight stitches that could hold thick hides together without tearing. Holes were carefully punched in the right places to avoid weakening the material, and sometimes decorative stitching served a dual purpose, reinforcing edges while adding visual patterns or clan markings. The act of stitching was both practical and meditative, a slow rhythm that tied together survival, artistry, and intention. Another aspect of layering was adaptation to seasonal change. In the depth of winter, multiple layers might be necessary: underfur, medium hides, thick outer coats, plus hoods, mittens, and boots. In the spring, when snow began to melt but nights remained cold, certain layers were removed or replaced with lighter materials, allowing flexibility while still providing essential insulation. This seasonal layering demonstrates the Ice Age people's sophistication, understanding of thermal regulation, and environmental responsiveness. They were not simply reacting to cold. They were anticipating it, planning for it, and engineering garments that adjusted with the climate. The layering principle extended beyond clothing to other forms of protection. For example, blankets and sleeping mats were often made with the same layering logic: soft inner layers, insulating middle layers, and durable outer layers to block wind. Even shelters were insulated with furs in multiple layers, laid carefully to trap warmth and create a... Construction was often a collaborative process. Hunters and tailors worked together, passing hides from one person to another, each applying their expertise. One might scrape and soften, another cut and shape, another stitch and reinforce. This teamwork ensured that each layer functioned as part of a coherent system. The finished garment was not the product of a single individual, but of a community's collective knowledge, skill, and experience. The legacy of Ice Age layering is profound. Modern clothing, coats, boots, mittens, and layered winter gear owes its principles to the innovations of these early humans. They understood the dynamics of heat, wind, moisture, and movement in a way that was entirely empirical, yet astonishingly effective. The layering principle allowed not only survival, but the flourishing of human culture in some of the harshest environments on Earth. And so, in the quiet of a cave, or the frost-bitten dawn of an open plain, Ice Age humans, dressed with intention, each garment, each layer, each stitch was a deliberate act of care for the self, for the hunter, for the community. Layering was more than fashion. It was a form of strategy, artistry, and wisdom combined. It reflected not only survival instinct, but patience, foresight, and a deep understanding of the relationship between humans and their environment. At night, after a day spent hunting or crafting, the layers of clothing would be removed, inspected, repaired, and laid near the fire to dry. Fur softened, hides relaxed, and sinew tightened with warmth. Each piece carried the memory of use: scratches, smears of blood, subtle wear patterns, documenting the life of the wearer. When dawn came again, these garments would be donned once more, reassembled into their layered architecture, ready to defend against wind, snow, and cold. The art of layering, therefore, was not a wanting skill but a living practice. Each days were informed repairs, modifications, and improvements. Every garment evolved through use, becoming more efficient, comfortable, and attuned to the person wearing it. The Ice Age human was constantly learning, adapting, and refining the balance between materials, movement, and warmth. Through this patience and observation, the practice of layering became a subtle but profound art, the foundation upon which the human relationship with clothing, fashion, and personal identity would be built for millennia to come. Layering was the silent genius of Ice Age fashion. It transformed raw hides, furs, and hair into functional works of art. It allowed humans to thrive in landscapes that would otherwise be uninhabitable. It created comfort in a harsh world, communicated identity, and connected communities through shared knowledge and craft. Every stitch, every fold, every carefully chosen material was a testament to ingenuity, patience, and the deep, quiet wisdom of early humans. And as the wind howled outside, snow drifting over the frozen landscape, the layered figures inside the shelter rested, cocooned in warmth, security, and the subtle artistry of their own creation. The Ice Age may have been cold, silent, and unforgiving, but within the embrace of carefully layered garments, life endured, protected, sustained, and quietly celebrated. The creation of clothing in the Ice Age was a process steeped in patience, skill, and an almost sacred respect for the materials at hand. It was not a simple task of wrapping fur around the body, but a deliberate series of actions that required understanding of both the properties of raw materials and the tools that could transform them. Imagine a shelter built against the rocky face of a cliff, where the wind howls through cracks in the stone. Inside, the fire burns low, casting flickering shadows on the walls as a small group of people works quietly. In this smoke-filled light, sinews are pulled, bones are carved, and the rhythmic motion of scraping, cutting, and stitching fills the air with an unspoken cadence. The tools and techniques of garment making were extensions of the human body, just as essential as the hands that wielded them. The first and most fundamental tool was the scraper, carved from stone, antler, or bone. Scrapers were designed to remove flesh, fat, and tissue from hides after the animal had been hunted. This step was critical. A poorly prepared hide would be stiff, prone to tearing, and ultimately useless. Scraping required rhythm and care, moving along the surface of the hide with deliberate strokes, feeling the subtle changes in texture beneath the tool. Too much pressure, and the hide could be gouged or thinned. Too little, and residual tissue would remain, causing the garment to rot or stiffen. The Ice Age craftsman learned to read the hide, sensing its readiness through touch and experience, developing a relationship with the material that was intuitive, yet honed through practice. Once the hide was scraped clean, it needed to be softened, tanned, a process that could take days or even weeks. Early humans discovered a variety of methods, often using what was available in the immediate environment. The brains of the animal itself could be applied to the inner side of the hide, massaged in to lubricate fibers and create suppleness. Smoke from the hearth could help preserve and soften, while plant oils or grasses could be rubbed in to provide additional pliability. Some communities experimented with fermentation or soaking in water to remove remaining impurities. The process was meticulous and meditative, turning what was once raw and rigid into a flexible, long-lasting material suitable for garments. Cutting the hide into the shapes needed for clothing was another skill that required precision. Flint blades, sharpened and maintained with care, were the primary instruments. Patterns were conceptualized in the mind first, passed down verbally or through demonstration, and then traced onto the hide, with careful scoring. The cuts had to account for the curves of the human body, the joints, and the seams, often requiring the artisan to hold the hide taut and rotate it to achieve symmetry. Even minor miscalculations could render a hide useless or require adjustments that compromised warmth or mobility. This stage was where geometry and intuition met, a silent dialogue between human intellect and the material itself. Once the pieces were cut, stitching began. Sinew, derived from the tendons and muscles of animals, was the primary thread, prized for its strength and elasticity. Dried and carefully twisted, it could hold thick hides together, endure repeated flexing, and resist tearing under stress. Bone needles, carved with precision and often slightly curved, were used to pierce the hide and pull the sinew through. The stitching technique varied according to the intended function. Small, tight stitches reinforced critical areas like shoulders or seams. Longer stitches allowed flexibility at the elbows, knees, or waist. The process was slow, deliberate, and repetitive, requiring intense concentration and tactile sensitivity. Mistakes could be undone, but each repair took time and skill. In addition to sinew, other materials were sometimes incorporated into the sewing process. Thin strips of hide, animal hair, or plant fibers could be braided into thread, adding strength or decorative detail. These secondary materials allowed for experimentation with texture, appearance, and resilience. Even small innovations could make a significant difference. A slightly thicker thread at the cuff might prevent fraying, while a decorative edge could also reinforce the seam. Every choice reflected practical knowledge and aesthetic sensibility, creating garments that were both functional and expressive. Beyond stitching, other techniques were employed to enhance the performance of the clothing. Scraping and pounding could thin or soften areas of the hide for better fit, while folding or layering could create insulation where it was most needed. Edges were sometimes bound with thin strips of hide, not only for durability, but to prevent snow and moisture from seeping into the seams. Fur was often carefully combed, arranged, or brushed to maximize its insulating properties, ensuring that the underfur lay flat against the skin, while guard hairs faced outward to repel water. Even these subtle manipulations required knowledge, patience, and a tactile sensitivity that modern industrial processes cannot replicate. Decoration and ornamentation were also integrated into the techniques of garment making. Holes could be punched for beads, dyes applied to create patterns, and small charms attached to belts or collars. These embellishments were not purely aesthetic. They could signal social status, clan affiliation, or personal achievement. The tools and techniques used to create these details, tiny awls, bone needles, pigments, and brushes made from animal hair, were as specialized as the tools for the garment itself. Their careful application demonstrated an understanding of both form and function. transforming practical clothing into a medium for identity and expression. Even footwear was a testament to the ingenuity of these early techniques. Boots were often constructed in multiple layers, combining tough outer hides with soft, insulating interiors. Soles were sometimes reinforced with additional hide or stitched in patterns that provided grip on ice and snow. The ankle and calf portions could be tailored to fit snugly, preventing drafts while still allowing mobility. Mittens and gloves were similarly constructed with layered hides, sometimes including a separate thumb compartment for dexterity. Every aspect of these garments reflected experimentation, adaptation, and a deep understanding of both human physiology and the properties of available materials. The creation of clothing was often a collaborative endeavor. One person might be skilled in preparing hides, another in cutting patterns, another in stitching or decorating. Knowledge was transmitted through demonstration, repetition, and careful observation. Children might watch elders at work, learning the rhythm of scraping, cutting, and sewing with attentive curiosity. This intergenerational transfer of skill ensured that techniques evolved slowly but continuously, incorporating improvements while preserving the essential methods that had kept humans alive for millennia. Seasonality also influenced tools and techniques. In warmer months, when animal hides were more readily available, workshops were busier with tanning, cutting, and sewing. In colder months, when hunting was dangerous and light was limited, maintenance and repair became the focus. Sinew was re-prepared, seams reinforced, and patches sewn onto worn garments. Even when production slowed, the knowledge of tools and techniques remained in practice, preserved in both memory and motion, ready to be applied when survival demanded new garments. In sum, the techniques of Ice Age garment making reflect a remarkable combination of practicality, artistry, and ingenuity. Every tool, scraper, needle, blade, or awl, was a critical extension of the human hand. Every technique, tanning, cutting, stitching, layering, decorating, required understanding, patience, and dexterity. Together, they transformed raw animal hides and fibers into clothing that could protect, express, and sustain. These methods reveal a deep engagement with the environment, a knowledge of materials, and a capacity for creativity that underscores the sophistication of Ice Age societies. Even in the quietest moments, as the fire flickered and shadows danced across the walls, the importance of these tools and techniques was evident. Clothing was a product of observation, skill, and intention. It was not merely worn, it was constructed, nurtured, and maintained. Each seam, each stitch, each carefully prepared hide represented the survival knowledge of generations, encoded in material form. The garments themselves became repositories of skill, memory, and identity, quietly enduring as both protection and statement in a frozen world. By understanding the tools and techniques of Ice Age clothing, we glimpse the ingenuity of our ancestors. We see how necessity drove innovation, how tactile knowledge became a form of wisdom, and how survival demanded patience, skill, and artistry. In the interplay of scraper, needle, sinew, and hide, the earliest humans expressed both their adaptability and their aesthetic sensibility. Each garment, painstakingly made, tells a story of survival, resilience, and the quiet genius of practical creativity. And so, as night descends on the frozen landscape, and the hunters and tailors gather around the fire, the tools lie ready for another day. Scrapers, needles, and sinew, warmed by the firelight, await hands that will transform the raw gifts of the animal world into layers of protection, comfort, and identity. The techniques endure, a silent testament to human ingenuity, the art of survival, and the timeless rhythm of making and wearing clothing that both sustains life and celebrates it. In the relentless grip of the Ice Age winter, the land was transformed into a kingdom of white and grey, where snowdrifts could swallow whole valleys, and the wind cut through layers of hide like a blade. In such an unforgiving environment, clothing was not a matter of fashion or style, alone it was survival. Every stitch, every layer, every selection of material carried life or death weight. Winter wear had to accomplish more than simply covering the body. It had to regulate heat, protect against wind and moisture, and allow for movement in landscapes that were at once beautiful and deadly. Imagine a small group preparing for a hunt, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, hands already numb as they adjust layers of reindeer hide, mammoth fur, and carefully stitched mittens. In this moment, clothing was their armor, their home, and their statement of ingenuity. The foundation of winter wear was insulation. Early humans discovered, through careful observation, that layering multiple materials could trap warmth more effectively than a single thick garment. Inner layers, soft and pliable, clung to the body, retaining heat generated by movement. Outer layers, tougher and stiffer, acted as barriers against wind, snow, and moisture. The interplay between inner and outer materials was crucial. If the outer layer was too permeable, snow could seep through. If it was too stiff, the body's natural movements could be hindered, reducing blood flow and increasing the risk of frostbite. The Ice Age tailor had to balance these competing needs, crafting ensembles that were simultaneously protective, flexible, and durable. Hoods were an essential feature of winter wear, often designed to cover not just the head, but the neck, shoulders, and part of the chest. The head loses heat faster than any other part of the body, and exposure could be fatal. Furs and hides were carefully chosen, with soft underfur on the inside for warmth and coarser guard hairs on the outside to repel wind and snow. Some hoods were elongated, forming a continuous barrier that merged seamlessly with the shoulders or even the upper torso, while others included fur trims to catch air and reduce heat loss. Inside, small adjustments could be made with additional layers or padding, reflecting an intuitive understanding of thermodynamics long before the term existed. Hands and feet required particular innovation. Mittens, often double-layered, insulated the hands while allowing dexterity. Boots combined thick soles, flexible uppers, and soft inner linings to maintain warmth while enabling long treks across snow and ice. Ice Age humans understood that extremities were most vulnerable to frostbite, and so every detail mattered. The height of the boot, the snugness of the fit, and even the padding inside were considered carefully. Some communities even created detachable layers for hands and feet, allowing them to adapt to temperature fluctuations and varying activity levels. Waterproofing was another critical innovation. Snow melting against the body or moisture from traversing icy streams could be deadly. To counter this, outer layers were often treated with animal fats, rubbed into the hide to create a barrier against wetness. Some furs, naturally oily or dense, were preferred for outer garments, while layers beneath absorbed and retained heat. Ice Age humans had developed a nuanced understanding of which combinations of materials best resisted moisture, showcasing a sophisticated empirical knowledge of environmental physics. Even a thin layer of fat applied to the surface could dramatically increase a garment's effectiveness in extreme cold, turning an ordinary hide into a protective shell against the elements. The construction of winter ensembles was also highly strategic. Clothing was rarely a single all-encompassing piece. Instead, it was composed of interlocking garments, each fulfilling a specific function. Tunics, trousers, boots, mittens, and hoods were layered to create a cohesive system of protection. Seams were staggered to minimize drafts, and overlapping layers ensured that no part of the body was exposed. Every element worked in harmony, reflecting an intricate understanding of anatomy, movement, and environmental challenges. The Ice Age tailor effectively engineered garments that were dynamic, responsive to activity, and tailored to the specific climates in which their wearers lived. Adaptation and innovation were constant. Some communities developed specialized winter wear for extreme hunting conditions. A hunter pursuing reindeer across frozen plains might wear a lighter inner layer to maintain mobility, with heavier outer layers that could be added or removed as exertion increased. Windproof panels of thick hide might be integrated at the chest and back, while flexible joints ensured that running, crouching, and climbing remained possible. Winter wear was therefore not static. It evolved with activity, location, and season, a dynamic response to the ever-changing Ice Age environment. Even children and the elderly benefited from innovative winter wear. Infants might be swaddled in multiple layers of fur, with tiny mittens and booties protecting delicate extremities. Elderly members of the community received garments with extra padding and insulation, ensuring that they could remain warm despite slower circulation and reduced mobility. This attention to detail reflects the Ice Age people's recognition that clothing was not just personal but communal, a means of protecting the most vulnerable alongside the strongest. Decoration was subtly integrated into winter. Wet beads, carved bones, and pigments were often applied to outer layers, signaling identity, skill, or social role. These embellishments were not merely ornamental. They could also reinforce seams, secure layers, or act as markers for navigation and visibility in snowy landscapes. The fusion of function and expression demonstrates that even in the harshest environments, Ice Age humans valued individuality and communication, embedding their identity into every layer of their garments. Maintenance was an ongoing concern. Snow, sweat, and dirt could compromise insulation or damage materials, so garments were regularly cleaned, dried, and repaired. Scraping, brushing, and reapplying fat ensured that furs retained their protective qualities, while stitches were reinforced and worn patches replaced. This continuous care was a form of intimate engagement with the clothing, transforming each garment into a living, evolving companion in the struggle against cold. The Ice Age winter also inspired experimentation. Hunters learned to combine multiple types of hides and furs, creating composite garments that optimized warmth, flexibility, and durability. Underlayers might be made of fine, insulating underfur, middle layers from reindeer hides for structural warmth, and outer layers from water repellent, furs treated with animal fat. Even feathers could be incorporated as lining for added insulation. This trilander approach, refined over generations, resulted in highly sophisticated ensembles that allowed humans to survive and thrive in conditions that would otherwise have been fatal. Mobility remained a central concern. Even the most insulated garments had to allow movement. This required strategic placement of seams, careful cutting of hide, and attention to the flexibility of joints. Ice Age humans understood that clothing could not be a static shell. It had to work in concert with the body, moving with each step, each stride across snow, ice, and rocky terrain. The garments were alive in a sense, responding to the wearer's movements while maintaining their protective function. Winterwear was also adapted for extreme conditions beyond hunting. Long treks, migrations, and periods of scarcity demanded clothing that could endure prolonged exposure to cold. Multiple layers could be combined into modular systems, allowing adjustments for activity levels, wind intensity, or precipitation. Over time, communities refined these systems, creating ensembles that were both standardized and adaptable, balancing universal principles of protection with individual needs and local environmental conditions. In essence, Ice Age winter wear was the embodiment of human ingenuity. It transformed raw materials into protective systems capable of sustaining life in some of the harshest climates the Earth has ever known. Every layer, every stitch, every selection of hide or fur was deliberate, reflecting intimate knowledge of materials, human physiology, and the demands of the environment. Clothing became a sophisticated tool, combining science, art, and experience into a seamless ensemble that ensured survival, comfort, and expression. By nightfall, as the hunters returned from the plains, their winter wear bore the marks of the day: snow clinging to outer layers, fur brushed and matted, sinew stitches holding firm. These garments had performed their function, defending against cold, enabling movement, and preserving life. They would be repaired, dried near the fire, and prepared for the next day. Each layer a testament to the careful planning, patience, and skill of their makers. Winterwear, therefore, was not simply clothing. It was a survival strategy, a work of art, and a form of cultural expression. It reflected the Ice Age people's ability to observe, adapt, and innovate, turning the raw materials of the frozen world into ensembles that protected, sustained, and communicated. In the quiet hush of the Ice Age night, as snow drifted silently across frozen landscapes, these garments rested with their wearers, a silent promise of warmth, survival, and ingenuity. In the vast, frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, where survival often depended on the delicate interplay between skill, ingenuity, and endurance, clothing was never merely functional. While warmth, protection, and mobility were paramount, garments also became a subtle language of identity, status, and cultural belonging. Imagine a small group gathered near a fire in a rocky shelter, shadows flickering across furs of different textures, patterns, and colors. Each coat, hood, and pair of boots tells a story of family, skill, achievement, or place within the community. Clothing, in this harsh environment, had evolved into a silent yet profound form of communication, signaling who the wearer was, their role, and their connection to the people and land around them. The materials themselves often conveyed meaning. Certain furs were rare, acquired from elusive animals or long hunts that demanded skill, patience, and endurance. Mammoth hide, thick and durable, was highly prized, as were the soft, patterned furs of lynx or fox. Those who wore these rare materials were often hunters of great experience, leaders of the group, or elders whose expertise and survival skills earned respect. Wearing such garments was not vanity. It was a visible marker of achievement and status. Even subtle differences, like the arrangement of fur or the regional differences, also emerged, reflecting both environmental conditions and cultural expression. Communities in northern tundras might favor thick, layered hides for extreme insulation, while those in slightly milder regions could employ lighter, more flexible furs, incorporating additional decorative elements. The choice of material, the style of layering, and the patterns of decoration could thus serve as a marker of geographic identity, allowing neighboring groups to recognize where a person came from, even across miles of frozen landscape. Clothing was therefore both adaptive and communicative, a bridge between environment, survival, and cultural expression. Even practical elements carried symbolic weight. The way a garment was prepared, stitched, or repaired demonstrated skill and resourcefulness. A well-maintained coat with precise seams and carefully selected materials reflected the expertise of both the wearer and the maker, signaling competence and reliability. Conversely, a poorly maintained or improvised garment could indicate youth, inexperience, or lower status within the community. Ice Age humans understood that clothing communicated much more than warmth. It embodied knowledge, care, and social roles. Adornment and layering could also indicate specialization. Hunters, gatherers, shamans, or toolmakers might employ specific patterns, trims, or materials associated with their craft. Hunter's hood might be reinforced with additional fur around the face and chest to protect against wind during long excursions, while also adorned with small talismans or symbolic markings celebrating successful hunts. A shaman or spiritual figure might wear garments decorated with feathers, beads, or pigments that conveyed connection to the natural and spiritual world. Through these choices, clothing became a medium for expressing expertise, spirituality, and social role, integrating survival with identity and culture. Seasonality further influenced the expression of identity through clothing. Winter garments, layered and insulated, allowed for both survival and embellishment. The addition of rare furs, intricate stitching, or pigments became more visible when multiple layers were worn, enhancing the symbolic and communicative potential of each ensemble. Summer or transitional garments, lighter and more flexible, highlighted other aspects of identity, such as skill, rank, or artistry. Through subtle use of materials and decoration, clothing was therefore a living, dynamic system, adapting to both environmental and social rhythms. Community practices also reinforced the cultural significance of clothing. Garments were often made collectively, with hunters, tailors, and elders contributing knowledge, labor, and skill. This collaboration not only ensured functionality, but transmitted cultural values and techniques from one generation to the next. Each garment, carefully constructed and maintained, became a repository of shared wisdom, a physical manifestation of communal identity. Wearing these garments connected individuals to their group, reinforcing bonds and ensuring that knowledge of survival, craft, and social structure endured. Clothing also played a role in communication across groups. Travelers or hunters visiting neighboring communities could be identified by the style, layering, or decoration of their garments, signaling origin, skill, or social affiliation. This visual language reduced misunderstandings and facilitated interactions, alliances, or negotiations. Even in a harsh, largely silent environment dominated by survival challenges, clothing allowed humans to communicate complex information efficiently and subtly. Over time, the symbolic and functional aspects of clothing became intertwined. A well-made layered coat not only protected against wind and cold, but also signified the skill, resourcefulness, and status of the wearer. Decorative elements, whether beads, pigments, or braided hair, conveyed identity and affiliation, while simultaneously reinforcing seams and structural elements. The dual purpose of these features demonstrates the sophistication of Ice Age human innovation, where survival and culture were inseparable. In essence, clothing in the Ice Age was much more than a necessity. It was a canvas for identity, a marker of social structure, and a repository of cultural knowledge. Each garment encoded skill, status, and belonging, allowing humans to survive while expressing individuality and connection to the community. In the flickering firelight of a cave, these garments were silent storytellers, carrying narratives of family, skill, achievement, and social cohesion. Every layer, stitch, and adornment contributed to a living language, weaving together survival and culture into a tangible form. By night, as communities gathered in shelters, the clothing worn and displayed reinforced both protection and identity. Outer layers showed rank and achievement, inner layers offered warmth and comfort, and the combination of materials, patterns, and decorations narrated the complex relationships of the group. These garments were living testaments to ingenuity, survival, and social sophistication, embodying the intersection of practicality and expression. Ice Age humans, through their clothing, demonstrated a profound understanding of both their environment and themselves, balancing the harsh demands of survival with the equally vital need for communication, identity, and belonging. Winter may have been unyielding, and the frozen world unforgiving, but through layered, carefully crafted, and decorated garments, ice-aged humans were able to endure, thrive, and define themselves. Clothing was more than protection, it was an assertion of existence, a celebration of skill, and a subtle but profound expression of the human spirit. Each layer, each stitch, each embellishment was both practical and symbolic, carrying meaning across generations and across frozen landscapes. And in the quiet hush of a winter's night, as fires burned and shadows danced, these garments whispered the stories of survival, identity, and the enduring ingenuity of our ancestors, while the layers of hides, furs, and sinew formed the essential foundation of Ice Age attire. It was the careful addition of accessories and ornamentation that transformed functional clothing into something deeply expressive, personal, and socially meaningful. Imagine a cold, windswept plain or the interior of a shadowed cave, where the fire flickers against walls of rock and ice, illuminating figures, adding the finishing touches to garments. The act of decorating and accessorizing clothing was slow, deliberate, and intimate, a process that combined utility, artistry, and subtle social signaling. Accessories were more than decoration. They were extensions of survival, identity, and culture, and each belts, straps, and pouches were functional accessories that also carried social and symbolic weight. Leather belts could be used to secure multiple layers, distribute weight, or carry essential tools. But they also allowed for ornamentation. Beads, carved tokens, or pigment patterns might be applied to signal rank, accomplishment, or family affiliation. Pouches, suspended from belts or slung across the body, held small items critical for daily survival, such as fire-starting tools, hunting implements, or medicinal plants. Yet the choice of material, shape, or decoration within these pouches could communicate subtly about the wearer's role, experience, or social position. Every accessory was therefore both practical and expressive, a testament to the integration of survival and culture in Ice Age life. Headgear beyond simple hoods also played a role in personal expression and social signaling. While hoods and wraps protected against the wind and cold, additional adornments like fur trims, feathers, or small carved ornaments added layers of meaning. In some groups, these features indicated status or achievements. In others, they might be protective symbols or spiritual talismans. The Ice Age human was simultaneously pragmatic and symbolic, understanding that visibility and recognition within a group could affect social interactions, cooperation, and even safety. Accessories, therefore, were not frivolous. They were carefully chosen tools in a complex social and environmental equation. Mittens and gloves, often layered for warmth, were similarly adapted for ornamentation. The outer layer of a mitten might feature stitching patterns that reinforced seams while simultaneously displaying skill or cultural motifs. Small additions like beads or sinew braiding could denote the maker's identity or the wearer's social role. Boots, too, became sites of expression, with stitched patterns, added trims, or specific hide choices signaling not just functionality but status, skill, or regional affiliation. Ice Age humans seemed to intuitively understand that even survival gear could carry symbolic power, reflecting identity while serving the practical purpose of keeping them alive in extreme conditions. Color and pigment were another avenue for expression. Ochre, charcoal, and other naturally occurring pigments were used to decorate outer garments, edges of belts, or accessories like pouches and straps. These decorations were often subtle, applied in dots, lines, or small motifs that enhanced visibility, signaled group affiliation, or marked accomplishments. The process of applying pigment required care. The surface had to be prepared, the pigment mixed and applied with precision, and the design maintained through wear and exposure to the elements. In this way, ornamentation was a slow, intentional act, integrating survival, social meaning, and aesthetic awareness into a single process. The act of accessorizing was not random but structured by cultural norms and practical considerations. Certain elements were reserved for ceremonial or special occasions, while others were used in daily life. The choice of adornment could indicate social rank, hunting experience, or even spiritual affiliation. Some accessories were only worn by hunters, while others marked successful completion of communal rituals or rites of passage. These conventions created a visual language understood by all members of the community, allowing clothing and accessories to convey complex social information without a single spoken word. Even small, portable items could carry significance. A carved bone pendant, a bead from a distant shore, or a feather collected during a hunt could be attached to garments, signaling personal achievement, travel, or spiritual insight. These objects were carefully maintained, stored, and repaired, reflecting both their value and their role in the broader symbolic landscape of Ice Age life. Their placement, visibility, and combination with other elements created layers of meaning that transcended mere decoration, linking the wearer to their environment, community, and ancestry. Gender and age were also communicated through accessories, while functional layers provided warmth for everyone. Subtle differences in ornamentation, choice of material, or patterns could indicate whether a garment belonged to a child, an adult, or an elder, to a male or female member of the group. These markers facilitated social cohesion and clarity, allowing individuals to navigate roles, responsibilities, and relationships within the community. Accessories, therefore, were not superficial. They were integrated into the social fabric, providing structure and signaling identity in ways that complemented language and behavior. Tools themselves became accessories in a way, often carried or displayed in conjunction with clothing. Flint knives, bone awls, or other implements could be attached to belts or slung from straps, immediately visible to others as markers of skill or profession. A hunter's tools, displayed on a decorated belt, were a form of personal storytelling, indicating prowess, experience, and readiness. These functional items doubled as social signals, merging practicality with symbolic meaning. Every addition, whether purely decorative or simultaneously functional, contributed to a cohesive system in which survival and culture were inseparable. The interplay of ornamentation and utility extended to repairs and modifications. Stitched patches, braided sinew, reinforcements, or added layers of fur not only extended the life of garments, but also offered opportunities for subtle decoration. Patterns formed through careful stitching or overlapping materials conveyed the maker's skill and care, turning each repair into a statement of craftsmanship. Ice Age humans understood that even maintenance could be a creative, expressive act, and that garments could continuously evolve in both function and meaning over time. Cultural differences in accessories and ornamentation were also notable. Regional variation influenced material choice, decorative motifs, and methods of attachment. Communities in coastal areas might incorporate shells or coral, while inland groups used bones, teeth, or specific types of fur. Even neighboring groups with similar climates could be distinguished through these subtle differences, allowing visual recognition across distances. Accessories became both practical tools and cultural signatures, encoding information about geography, identity, and social organization into tangible forms. In essence, the careful addition of accessories and ornamentation elevated Ice Age clothing from mere survival gear to a sophisticated medium of communication and identity. Beads, feathers, pigments, carved bones, belts, pouches, and tools were integrated with precision and intention, reinforcing warmth, utility, and social signaling simultaneously. Through these additions, garments became living documents of experience, skill, and social relationships, each layer telling a story that transcended the immediate need for protection. By nightfall, as fires glowed and shadows danced across cave walls, the figures wearing these adorned garments were both protected and articulated. Outer layers, reinforced and decorated, displayed social signals. Inner layers, insulated and comforted. Accessories told stories of hunting, travel, skill, and spirituality. Clothing was no longer just fabric and fur. It was a language, a record, and a declaration of human ingenuity, adaptability, and aesthetic awareness. Ice Age humans had transformed survival into an art form, weaving functionality, expression, and identity into every stitch, every accessory, and every decorative touch. And so, in the quiet hours before sleep, when the wind howled across frozen plains and snow whispered against the shelter walls, these garments remained with their wearers as more than mere protection. They were companions, storytellers, and silent witnesses to the lives, achievements, and identities of those who had mastered the delicate balance between survival and expression. In every bead, feather, and stitch, the ingenuity of Ice Age humans shone, reminding us that even in the harshest environments, creativity, care, and identity endured alongside warmth and survival. The world of the Ice Age was vast, varied, and unforgiving. A frozen expanse stretching from jagged mountains to windswept plains, icy rivers, and snow-laden forests. The climate was harsh, the terrain unpredictable, and survival demanded constant adaptation. In such a landscape, clothing could not exist in isolation from the environment. It was inseparable from the land, the weather, and the cycles of the seasons. Every garment, layer, and accessory was a direct response to the natural world, molded by necessity, observation, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. Imagine standing on a ridge, overlooking a frozen valley, the wind biting through fur, the snow glittering under a pale sun, as hunters prepare for a long trek. In this moment, every decision about clothing, thickness, layering, material choice, and insulation was guided by the environment, and the people themselves had become extensions of it. The first and most obvious influence was temperature. Ice Age winters were brutal, with temperatures plunging far below freezing for extended periods. Wind chill, snowstorms, and freezing precipitation made the difference between life and death. Clothing was designed primarily to conserve body heat, trap warmth, and prevent frostbite. Layering was essential, with inner layers of soft underfur or thin hides retaining heat close to the body, while outer layers of thick fur or fat-treated hides blocked wind and repelled snow. The combination was a sophisticated system of insulation, tailored to activity and terrain. Hunters moving across open plains might wear flexible layers for mobility while maintaining warmth, while those preparing for long periods of stationary observation, waiting by frozen rivers or cliffside hunting posts, added heavier outer layers and additional insulation to combat wind exposure. Altitude and terrain were equally decisive. Mountainous regions demanded clothing that could endure both cold temperatures and rugged rocky surfaces. Hides were selected not only for insulation but for durability, with extra layers added to areas prone to abrasion: elbows, knees, shoulders, and the soles of boots. In icy valleys, where frozen rivers and snowfields required careful navigation, garments were layered to allow movement without compromising warmth. The weight of fur and hide had to be distributed thoughtfully, and boots and mittens reinforced to prevent injury. Even subtle environmental factors, like the likelihood of snow sliding into sleeves or boots, informed design decisions. Ice Age humans had developed a deep understanding of how terrain affected thermal regulation, mobility, and endurance, translating observation into precise construction choices. Seasonal variation demanded constant adaptation. Summer and transitional periods presented milder temperatures, but still required protection against cold nights, wind, and precipitation. Lighter hides, thinner layers, and breathable garments were employed during warmer periods, with optional outer layers available for sudden temperature drops. Winter demanded maximum insulation, and garments often became modular, with additional layers, hoods, mittens, and boot linings added or removed depending on activity level. The adaptability of Ice Age clothing reflects an intimate knowledge of environmental patterns, combined with practical experimentation, which combinations of hide, fur, and accessories maintained warmth while allowing mobility, which materials repelled snow and moisture, and which arrangements prevented heat loss in the most exposed areas. Local wildlife also influenced clothing choices. The availability and type of animals determined both materials and aesthetic choices. In tundra regions, reindeer, mammoth, and Arctic fox provided thick furs ideal for insulation, while coastal or forested areas offered smaller mammals, birds, and other sources of hide. The properties of these furs, density, softness, guard hairs, and natural oils, directly shaped garment construction. Hunters became adept at assessing the qualities of each hide, understanding which animals provided warmth, flexibility, or durability. Even the coloration of fur could influence its use. Darker hides might be reserved for outer layers to absorb sunlight, while lighter underfur was used close to the skin for insulation. Clothing was therefore an ecological response, blending environmental observation with human ingenuity. Wind and exposure were particularly influential. Open plains, frozen plateaus, and snow-laden forests exposed the body to relentless gusts. Clothing had to resist wind penetration while allowing breathing, movement, and hunting activity. Hoods were often extended and lined with soft fur. Cuffs were reinforced, and overlapping layers created barriers against drafts. In some cases, additional elements like fur trims around the face or layered collars provided extra protection, effectively creating a windproof shield without restricting vision or mobility. Ice Age humans learned to read the direction and force of prevailing winds, adjusting clothing layers and accessories to maintain warmth in even the most exposed conditions. Snow and moisture also dictated construction choices. Melting snow, icy sleet, or river crossings could compromise insulation if garments absorbed water. Some furs were naturally water-resistant, while others were treated with animal fat or oils to repel moisture. Clothing was often layered strategically to prevent critical inner layers from becoming wet, and boots were designed with high tops and overlapping seams to keep feet dry. Even small environmental variations, like drifting snow piling against a shelter entrance or frozen river crossings, influenced how garments were worn, layered, and reinforced. Ice Age humans were constantly adapting, experimenting, and refining their techniques in direct response to these environmental challenges. Mobility and function were inseparable from environmental considerations. Traversing frozen landscapes required clothing that provided warmth without restricting movement. Thick layers had to be balanced with flexibility, and seams positioned to avoid chafing or tearing during long treks. Hunters needed to crouch, sprint, and climb without losing insulation, while gatherers required garments that allowed dexterity for collecting plants or handling tools. Even the smallest detail, the placement of a seam, the layering of a cuff, or the inclusion of an extra strip of fur, could affect performance. Every choice reflected careful observation of the body in relation to the environment. Ice Age humans also considered psychological and social factors influenced by the environment. Clothing that conveyed warmth and protection reassured individuals in extreme conditions, supporting endurance during long hunts or migrations. Accessories and ornamentation reinforced identity and cohesion, which were vital in situations where survival depended on teamwork and communication. The landscape was both a challenge and a stage. Garments needed to signal skill, social role, and experience, enabling effective interaction and cooperation across distances and difficult terrain. Clothing became an integrated system, uniting environmental adaptation with social intelligence. Temperature, terrain, and wildlife were not the only factors. Microclimates played a role as well. Sheltered valleys, south-facing slopes, icy riversides, and forest edges each presented different challenges. Garments were often adapted to these specific niches. Lighter, more breathable layers near water, heavier and wind-resistant garments on exposed ridges. Ice Age humans learned to anticipate environmental changes, adjusting layering, materials, and accessories for the specific microclimate they faced. This adaptability demonstrates a sophisticated, empirical understanding of climate and geography, a knowledge passed down through generations and refined over centuries. Even the act of moving across different terrains influenced fashion. As humans migrated seasonally, garments had to be flexible, portable, and capable of quick repair. Modular clothing systems, layered ensembles, and accessories that could be removed or added became crucial. Belts, straps, pouches, and detachable fur pieces allowed adaptation on the move, balancing warmth, protection, and mobility. The very design of clothing became a response to human interaction with the environment. Garments were not static, but dynamic, evolving with every step, hunt, and journey. In essence, Ice Age fashion was a direct conversation with the environment. Every material selected, every layer added, and every accessory incorporated was guided by observation, experience, and necessity. Climate dictated insulation. Terrain dictated durability and mobility. Wildlife dictated material properties. Wind, snow, and water dictated layering, waterproofing, and trimming. Clothing was a complex, adaptive system, bridging human ingenuity and environmental understanding, allowing early humans not only to survive, but to thrive in extreme conditions.
By nightfall, as snow settled over frozen plains and the wind quieted against the shelter walls, garments were laid out, repaired, and prepared for another day. Each ensemble represented a careful synthesis of environmental knowledge, survival strategy, and cultural practice. The hides, furs, and layers were not merely protection against cold. They were a dialogue with the land, a record of human observation, experimentation, and creativity. Ice Age humans had transformed the environment into a guide for fashion, crafting clothing that reflected not only necessity, but intelligence, foresight, and the profound capacity to harmonize with the world around them. And so, in the quiet hours before sleep, the frozen landscape remained formidable, yet the carefully layered, insulated, and adaptive clothing of Ice Age humans provided warmth, mobility, and confidence. Garments were a testament to survival, a record of environmental knowledge, and an enduring expression of human ingenuity. Each layer, each trim, each accessory bore the imprint of observation, adaptation, and mastery of the land, allowing humanity to endure, explore, and flourish in a world defined by ice, wind, and the unforgiving rhythm of seasons. In the Ice Age, survival was inseparable from the rhythm of work, and work was inseparable from the environment, the tools, and the clothing that enabled each human to act effectively within it. Hunting, gathering, tool-making, and shelter construction all demanded garments that were simultaneously protective, flexible, and functional, yet capable of signaling experience, skill, or social role. Imagine a scene in a frozen forest clearing a small group preparing for the day's hunt. Boots, carefully tightened mittens, layered belts fastened with pouches of essential tools, and outer layers of fur adjusted to protect against both wind and snow. Every stitch, layer, and accessory has been shaped not by abstract fashion ideals, but by the practical demands of daily survival. Clothing was a silent collaborator in every action, a bridge between human ingenuity and the harsh realities of Ice Age life. Hunting required clothing that offered mobility without sacrificing warmth. Pursuing reindeer across icy plains, climbing rocky ridges, or waiting motionless by frozen rivers demanded garments that could flex with the body. Tunics and trousers were cut and stitched to allow squatting, crouching, running, and jumping, while maintaining insulation. Outer layers of thick furs provided protection against wind and snow, and hoods shielded the head and neck. However, excess bulk could hinder movement, so garments were carefully balanced. Additional layers could be added or removed, and trim around joints reinforced with sinew or leather allowed for flexibility. Even small design details, like the tapering of sleeves or the overlapping of leg coverings, reflected a sophisticated understanding of ergonomics and human anatomy. Footwear was critical for survival and mobility. Boots had to keep feet warm and dry while enabling long treks across snow, ice, and rocky terrain. Soles were reinforced with multiple layers of hide, sometimes stitched together for durability, while uppers were made of supple, insulating material. Fur linings trapped heat close to the skin, and cuffs prevented snow from entering. Hunters often added removable inserts or padding to adapt to different terrains, while straps or laces ensured a snug fit, preventing chafing during prolonged activity. Ice Age humans understood that compromised feet could endanger survival, so boot design was both practical and meticulously considered. Hands were equally vulnerable, and mittens or gloves reflected the balance between warmth and dexterity. Hunters needed to grasp spears, handle tools, and manipulate ropes or snares without losing insulation. Layered mittens, sometimes with reinforced palms or fingertips, allowed for these tasks. Outer layers might be treated with animal fat to repel moisture, while inner layers remained soft and insulating. The hands were instruments of survival, and the design of protective clothing was informed by direct observation of how they moved, flexed, and became numb in the cold. In every stitch, Ice Age humans integrated the lessons of experience, ensuring that garments served both protection and function. Beyond hunting, daily work shaped clothing in equally profound ways. Gathering firewood, preparing hides, constructing shelters, and crafting tools demanded garments resistant to wear and tear. Sleeves, knees, and shoulders often received additional layers or reinforcements, while belts and straps distributed weight evenly for carrying tools or supplies. Pouches, attached to belts or slung across the body, carried essential implements within easy reach, reducing the risk of dropping them in icy conditions. Clothing thus became a functional system, a toolkit woven into every layer, allowing humans to perform necessary tasks efficiently and safely. Layering, a hallmark of Ice Age clothing, served multiple purposes in daily life. Inner layers retained warmth, middle layers added insulation, and outer layers offered wind and moisture protection. This system was dynamic. Hunters could remove outer layers during bursts of activity to prevent overheating and reapply them during periods of waiting or exposure. Even in work settings, layers allowed adaptation. Kneeling, climbing, or manipulating tools was easier when garments were flexible and modular. Ice Age humans had developed a keen sense of balance between insulation and mobility, turning clothing into a living, responsive system that interacted with both body and environment. Specialized garments were often created for particular tasks. Hunters might wear reinforced tunics for stalking large prey, with added protection around the chest and shoulders to reduce injury risk from branches, falls, or encounters with animals. Gatherers might employ flexible leggings and reinforced mittens for reaching into brambles, ice, or dense underbrush. Toolmakers and artisans might wear aprons or protective layers that shielded clothing from sharp edges, hot embers, or staining materials. Even within the same group, clothing could reflect specialization, allowing the body to move efficiently while remaining insulated, protected, and functional. Weather conditions influenced daily clothing choices as well. Blizzard-like snow, freezing rain, and gusting winds demanded heavier outer layers and protective hoods, while milder days allowed for lighter garments that emphasized mobility. Ice Age humans had developed an intuitive understanding of local weather patterns, predicting temperature drops or wind shifts and adjusting their layers accordingly. Belts, pouches, mittens, and hoods could be rearranged, added, or removed in minutes, allowing humans to respond to environmental changes without compromising survival or efficiency. Clothing was a dynamic partner, constantly adjusted to meet the demands of activity and climate. Repair and maintenance were integral to the function of daily wear. Constant movement, exposure to ice, snow, and abrasive surfaces, and repeated hunting excursions caused wear that needed careful attention. Hides were stitched, reinforced, and patched, often with skillful embroidery or sinew weaving that simultaneously repaired and decorated garments. Accessories and ornamentation were preserved or replaced, ensuring that clothing maintained both its functional integrity and social or symbolic significance. Ice Age humans recognized that well-maintained garments extended not only warmth and protection, but also the capacity for sustained activity in a demanding environment. Practical innovation extended to the incorporation of animal fat, oil, and other natural treatments. Outer layers of fur were often rubbed with fat to repel water, reduce snow absorption, and enhance durability. In some regions, additional treatments made leather more supple or resistant to freezing, allowing boots, belts, and mittens to remain functional across extreme conditions. These innovations reflected careful experimentation and empirical knowledge, a continuous refinement of techniques to enhance survival, comfort, and efficiency. Clothing was therefore a product of both art and science, shaped by observation, testing, and the practical demands of daily life. Even communal activities were influenced by clothing. Coordinated hunts or group expeditions required garments that allowed visibility, mobility, and differentiation between roles. Outer layers might be decorated or patterned to signal rank or function during collaborative efforts, while modular systems ensured adaptability for various tasks. Clothing became part of the communication network within the group, allowing humans to interact effectively and safely in environments where survival depended on cooperation, skill, and awareness. Clothing for work also reflected environmental interaction. Ice Age humans observed how fur trapped snow, how layering reduced wind penetration, and how moisture affected insulation. These observations informed practical design choices. Cuffs, hoods, boots, and mittens were adjusted to minimize heat loss. Layers were overlapped strategically. Seams were reinforced to withstand friction and movement. Every garment represented a synthesis of experience, experimentation, and adaptation, a testament to the practical intelligence of early humans.
The fusion of utility and expression persisted even in work clothing. While practical considerations dominated, subtle ornamentation often remained. Stitched patterns reinforced seams while signaling skill. Beads or feathers indicated social role, and pigment markings conveyed identity or achievement. Even functional clothing retained symbolic and social significance, blending survival with culture. Ice Age humans understood that practicality and expression were not mutually exclusive, and that clothing could simultaneously protect, enable action, and communicate meaning. In essence, clothing for hunting and work in the Ice Age was a dynamic or adaptive system that responded to the intertwined demands of survival, environment, and social structure. Every stitch, layer, and accessory was informed by observation, experimentation, and experience. Footwear, mittens, outer layers, belts, and pouches were not mere protection. They were tools, extensions of the body, and expressions of skill and identity. Garments were living systems, evolving over time to meet the challenges of cold, wind, terrain, and activity. By nightfall, as hunters returned with prey, gatherers laid down tools, and fires flickered across icy landscapes. Clothing bore the marks of the day's labor. Outer layers were dusted with snow, boots were scuffed, mittens matted with ice, and belts stretched from carrying equipment. Yet each garment had fulfilled its purpose. It had protected, insulated, enabled, and communicated. Repairs would be made, adjustments noted, and the clothing prepared for another day, embodying both continuity and innovation. In the quiet hours before sleep, the importance of clothing for hunting and work became clear. Garments were more than protection against the cold. They were instruments of survival, repositories of knowledge, and markers of skill, experience, and identity. They reflected careful observation, practical ingenuity, and the deep understanding that every layer, every stitch, and every accessory could influence life or death. In the frozen expanse of the Ice Age, daily survival was inseparable from clothing, and Ice Age humans had transformed necessity into an art form, blending function, adaptation, and cultural expression into every garment they wore. In the Ice Age, clothing was never merely a matter of warmth or practicality. As humans confronted a world defined by extremes, frozen winds, long nights, and the ever-present threat of hunger and danger, they imbued their garments with meaning, turning layers of fur, hides, and sinew into symbols of belief, ritual, and spiritual connection. Imagine a cave illuminated by the soft glow of a fire, shadows dancing across walls painted with early depictions of animals, hunts, and abstract forms. Here, clothing was part of the ritual landscape, a conduit between the human and the natural, the living and the unseen. In these moments, what one wore was not just protection against cold, it was an expression of identity, a connection to the forces of life and death, and a statement of participation in something larger than oneself. Ritual clothing often incorporated elements drawn directly from the natural world. Feathers, teeth, claws, shells, and bones were sewn into garments with deliberate intent, each carrying symbolic weight. A line of fox teeth along a collar might invoke cunning or agility. Feathers on a hood could represent flight or spiritual freedom, and shells collected from distant rivers or coastal shores could signify connection with distant lands or ancestors. The placement of these elements was intentional, following patterns passed down through generations, sometimes reflecting seasonal changes, spiritual beliefs, or mythological narratives. Each addition carried both meaning and memory, embedding the wearer within a complex network of social, spiritual, and environmental relationships. Pigments played an essential role in ritual clothing. Ochre, charcoal, red clay, and other natural dyes were applied to hides, fur, or even directly to the body, creating motifs that were both decorative and symbolic. These markings could signify a rite of passage, readiness for a hunt, or a connection to spiritual practices. The process of applying pigment was meditative and deliberate, involving preparation of the material, careful application, and repeated attention to detail to ensure that the colors and patterns endured. In some cases, pigment was used to highlight or reinforce seams, turning functional elements into vehicles of symbolism. Color became a language, and garments transformed into texts that communicated identity, status, and spiritual alignment to those who could read their signs. Cloaks and robes for ceremonial use often differed from everyday clothing in structure, material, and ornamentation, while functional garments emphasized warmth, flexibility, and durability. Ceremonial clothing emphasized visibility, symbolism, and the conveyance of cultural narratives. Extra layers, intricate stitching, elaborate decorations, and rare materials were reserved for special occasions. These garments were not only worn but performed. Each movement, gesture, or posture enhanced the meaning of the attire, conveying status, spiritual insight, or participation in communal ritual. Even the act of donning these garments was a ritual in itself, marking transition, readiness, and transformation. Headgear was particularly significant in spiritual contexts. Hoods, hats, or masks crafted from fur, feathers, or carved wood could serve as both protection and symbolic focus. Masks might imitate animals, invoking traits associated with them: strength, agility, or cunning, while hoods lined with patterned furs could symbolize status, wisdom, or connection to ancestors. Shamans or spiritual leaders often wore the most elaborate pieces, signaling their role within the group and their perceived ability to communicate with unseen forces. Clothing, in this context, became an extension of ritual identity, transforming the human body into a living symbol of cultural belief. Accessories reinforced spiritual and social meaning. Belts, pouches, necklaces, and bracelets could carry talismans, medicinal herbs, or symbolic objects, integrating the practical with the ceremonial. Items that might otherwise be purely functional were carefully positioned to maximize visibility or significance during ritual activity. Even everyday clothing could carry residual spiritual meaning, as patterns, stitching, and adornments traced connections to ancestors, spirits, and the natural world. The boundary between practical and ceremonial clothing was fluid, reflecting a worldview in which survival, spirituality, and identity were inseparable. Seasonal rituals had a direct influence on clothing design. Winter solstice, hunting celebrations, or rites of passage were accompanied by garments specifically prepared for the occasion. Extra layers, rare furs, or unusual decorations distinguished ceremonial wear from the everyday, highlighting participation and readiness. These garments were maintained with care, often repaired or enhanced to retain both function and symbolic power. The cycle of the seasons and the rhythm of community life shaped clothing in profound ways, embedding environmental awareness, cultural memory, and spiritual belief into every layer, seam, and trim. Clothing also played a role in signaling personal transformation. Initiates into adult roles, hunters celebrating first successful kills, or shamans entering new stages of spiritual practice often donned specialized garments that marked their transition. Hides might be painted with specific patterns, feathers or bones added to signify achievement, and belts or pouches adjusted to carry symbolic tools. The physical act of wearing these garments was intertwined with psychological and social change, reinforcing identity, accomplishment, and connection to group traditions. Each garment was a living record of personal history, visible to both the wearer and the community. Gender and age distinctions were maintained in ritual contexts, with specific clothing reserved for men, women, or children during ceremonies. Young children preparing for their first seasonal ritual might wear simpler garments, while adults donned fully layered and ornamented attire that displayed skill, status, and spiritual readiness. Elders often wore distinctive additions, rare furs, additional layers, or highly decorated accessories, signaling wisdom, experience, and guidance. Clothing thus communicated multiple layers of meaning simultaneously: function, protection, identity, spiritual status, and social hierarchy. Environmental factors remained crucial even in ceremonial clothing. Rituals performed outdoors, near icy rivers, in open plains, or on snowy ridges required garments that balanced symbolism with protection. Extra layers were added to maintain warmth, hoods reinforced for wind protection, and boots designed to provide stability and traction. Shamans leading winter rituals or hunters performing preparatory ceremonies understood that survival and spiritual expression were interdependent, and clothing had to accommodate both. Ice Age humans demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in designing garments that harmonized these dual requirements. Adornment in ritual clothing often carried messages recognizable to other groups. Feathers, beads, or shells collected from distant regions signaled travel, alliances, or social connections beyond the immediate community. Patterns stitched into hides could communicate origin, skill, or accomplishment. Clothing, therefore, became a medium of cross-community communication, conveying identity and affiliation while reinforcing local, spiritual, and social structures. Even in a landscape defined by ice and isolation, garments allowed humans to maintain connection, express individuality, and participate in shared cultural narratives. The making of ritual garments was itself a communal act. Elders, skilled hunters, and artisans collaborated, combining knowledge of materials, sewing techniques, and symbolic design. These processes reinforced social cohesion, ensured transmission of cultural knowledge, and created garments that were repositories of collective experience. The care with which clothing was prepared, maintained, and worn reflected deep respect for both practical and spiritual needs, emphasizing the interconnection between community, survival, and belief. In essence, ritual clothing in the Ice Age was an eloquent fusion of function, symbolism, and spirituality. Hides and furs were not merely layered for warmth, they were transformed into texts, conveying identity, status, and spiritual alignment. Feathers, bones, pigments, and beads enhanced visibility, added meaning, and reinforced cultural narratives. Every stitch, layer, and accessory reflected observation, skill, and belief, turning garments into living expressions of human ingenuity and imagination. As night fell in the shelter, with the wind howling across frozen plains and snowflakes drifting past cave openings, the garments of ritual and ceremony retained their power. They marked readiness, signaled status, and connected humans to both the living world and the unseen forces they revered. Clothing was no longer simply protection. It was performance, communication, and memory. Each layer, each ornament, each carefully stitched pattern told a story of survival, community, and spirituality, linking human beings to the rhythms of the land and the cycles of life. In the quiet before sleep, when hunters rested, children curled in soft furs, and shamans reflected by flickering firelight, these garments remained silent witnesses to the interplay of survival and belief. They were tools, symbols, and companions, protecting against the elements while conveying identity, achievement, and spiritual alignment. In the hands of Ice Age humans, clothing was transformed into a medium of meaning, a bridge between practicality and ritual, body and spirit, community and individual. Each layer, each trim, each accessory whispered the enduring story of human creativity, resilience, and the profound capacity to turn survival into an art form that encompassed both the physical and the spiritual world. As the Ice Age recedes into the distant past, the clothing of its people remains an enduring testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and creativity. Although time has eroded most physical remnants, leaving behind only fragments of hide, traces of pigments, and impressions in archaeological sites, the story of Ice Age fashion continues to speak to us across millennia. It tells of humans confronting extreme environments, of communities shaping their tools, garments, and adornments to meet the challenges of survival, and of individuals expressing identity, skill, and belief through the very clothing they wore. To examine the legacy of Ice Age fashion is to explore the intersection of survival, culture, and artistry, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, human beings found ways to innovate, adapt, and communicate. One of the most remarkable lessons of Ice Age clothing is the principle of layering and adaptation. Modern clothing often relies on complex textiles and insulation technologies, yet the Ice Age human accomplished similar results with intuition, observation, and experimentation. By combining underlayers of soft hides with outer layers of thick furs, adding hoods, mittens, and boots, and reinforcing key areas against abrasion or exposure, Ice Age humans created clothing that could respond dynamically to cold, wind, moisture, and terrain. This principle of modularity, of adaptable and responsive attire, resonates in contemporary clothing design, from outdoor gear to technical fabrics. Layering was not merely a survival tactic, it was a carefully developed system informed by intimate knowledge of the body, the environment, and the requirements of daily life. The careful selection of materials demonstrates another enduring insight. Ice Age humans understood the properties of different furs, hides, feathers, bones, and pigments. They assessed insulation, flexibility, water resistance, and durability, creating garments optimized for specific climates, tasks, and social roles. This empirical approach reflects an advanced understanding of materials science, long before the existence of formal chemistry or physics. The legacy is visible today in the appreciation of natural fibers, the design of sustainable clothing, and the recognition that materials chosen thoughtfully can balance function, comfort, and aesthetics. Every piece of Ice Age clothing was a small laboratory experiment, perfected over generations through observation, trial, and meticulous adaptation. Functionality and expression were inseparable. Clothing was never purely utilitarian. It also communicated identity, skill, achievement, and social standing. Belts, pouches, beads, feathers, pigments, and stitching patterns all conveyed messages legible to those within the community. In this way, Ice Age fashion foreshadowed one of the most fundamental aspects of modern clothing, its role as social and cultural language. Just as today we use attire to signal profession, status, affiliation, or personal taste, so too did Ice Age humans express meaning through their garments. Fashion, in this context, was not frivolous, it was a survival strategy intertwined with social cohesion, recognition, and the communication of experience. Ritual and spirituality further enhanced the legacy of Ice Age fashion. Garments worn during ceremonies or special occasions integrated symbolism, pigment, ornamentation, and design to convey connection to the natural world, ancestors, and unseen forces. Even practical garments retained traces of symbolic meaning, reminding us that function and expression were never mutually exclusive. Ice Age humans understood that clothing could be a bridge between the physical and spiritual, the individual and the collective, the present and the past. This integration of survival, identity, and spirituality provides a profound lesson. Even in the harshest conditions, humans seek to embed meaning, narrative, and artistry into the objects they create and wear. The adaptability of Ice Age clothing is perhaps the most enduring legacy. Environmental variation, seasonal change, and the demands of work and mobility necessitated garments that could evolve with context. Boots, mittens, belts, and layers were adjustable, repairable, and modular, reflecting a dynamic approach to clothing design. Modern outdoor gear, modular clothing systems, and functional fashion continue to draw upon this principle, demonstrating that adaptability, observation, and responsiveness are timeless elements of effective attire. Ice Age humans were not passive survivors, they were active designers, continuously refining their garments to meet the ever-changing challenges of life in extreme climates. Social and cultural transmission of clothing knowledge also resonates across time. Skills in sewing, tanning, layering, and ornamentation were passed down through generations, creating continuity and evolution in fashion practices. Techniques, patterns, and symbolic meanings were embedded in community memory, ensuring that each generation benefited from the accumulated wisdom of the past. Today, we recognize similar patterns in apprenticeship, cultural craft traditions, and the preservation of artisanal techniques. The Ice Age provides a striking example of how clothing can be both practical and a vessel of cultural memory, sustaining knowledge across time and space. Accessories and ornamentation underscore the dual function of Ice Age fashion. Beads, claws, feathers, shells, and pigments were not only decorative, they reinforced social and spiritual identity, indicated achievement, and allowed communication within and between groups. The legacy is clear in modern fashion's emphasis on accessories, personal expression, and the layering of meaning. Ice Age humans demonstrated that even small objects could carry significance far beyond their material presence, reminding us that fashion is a language capable of conveying history, narrative, and status. Clothing for work and hunting demonstrates yet another aspect of the legacy: innovation under necessity. Each garment, from reinforced boots to layered mittens, resulted from careful observation of activity, terrain, and climate. Adaptations for mobility, dexterity, and protection reveal an early form of ergonomic design, anticipating modern principles of functional clothing. The balance between warmth and flexibility, protection and freedom of movement, is a lesson that continues to inform clothing design today. Ice Age humans, in their pursuit of survival, laid the foundation for understanding how clothing can optimize both human performance and safety. Beyond practical lessons, the aesthetic sensibilities of Ice Age humans resonate through time. Patterns stitched into hides, subtle color applications, and careful placement of beads and feathers reflect a sense of beauty, symmetry, and proportion. Even when driven by survival, humans found ways to express artistry and personal taste. This insight reminds us that fashion is inherently human. It is simultaneously functional and expressive, protective and communicative, utilitarian and beautiful. Ice Age clothing, in this light, becomes a testament not only to survival, but to the enduring human impulse to create, embellish, and make the world more meaningful. The study of Ice Age fashion also informs our understanding of resilience. In extreme environments, humans developed clothing systems that enabled long-distance movement, complex social interaction, and spiritual practice. Garments were crafted for durability, repairability, and adaptability, demonstrating foresight, ingenuity, and foresight in resource management. The capacity to survive and thrive in such conditions depended not only on physical skill but on clothing, as a tool and mediator between body and environment. Modern designers, survival experts, and historians alike can learn from these lessons, recognizing that thoughtful design, observation, and adaptation remain essential to enduring harsh conditions. Finally, the legacy of Ice Age fashion invites reflection on the deep continuity of human experience. The same principles of layering, material selection, adaptation, ornamentation, and symbolic expression continue to shape how we dress, communicate, and interact with our environment. Every coat, boot, or scarf we wear is part of a long lineage, tracing back to those who learned to turn fur and hide into protection, expression, and culture. Ice Age humans remind us that clothing is more than fabric. It is an intimate interface with the world, a tool for survival, a canvas for identity, and a bridge connecting generations. As we close the story of Ice Age fashion, we see that the past is not distant or abstract. It is alive in the principles, practices, and sensibilities that continue to guide human life. Clothing, in the Ice Age as now, was an act of thought, observation, and care. It was a record of experience, a statement of identity, and a testament to human ingenuity. Every stitch, layer, and accessory tells a story of adaptation, creativity, and resilience, a story that endures, inviting us to reflect on the remarkable ways humans have confronted the world and shaped it in turn. And so, as the fire dwindles, snow drifts past the entrance of a long-abandoned shelter, and the cold wind whispers through the ancient landscape, the legacy of Ice Age clothing remains with us. It reminds us of survival and artistry, observation and innovation, culture and communication. In each layer, each ornament, each carefully crafted piece, we hear the echo of a people who lived, created, and thrived in a world of ice and wind. Their garments were more than protection, they were an enduring expression of human resilience, ingenuity, and the desire to leave a mark upon the world. And as we lay down to sleep, wrapped in the comfort of modern clothing, we carry within us the quiet legacy of those who learned long ago to weave survival, meaning, and beauty into every stitch, every layer, and every garment. Good night, traveler, until we meet again on the frozen plains of history, where the past whispers softly through the warmth of clothing and the stories it tells. As we step back from the frozen landscapes, the snow-laden forests, and the icy plains of the Ice Age, we begin to understand that clothing was far more than mere protection from the cold. It was a testament to human ingenuity, creativity, and the ability to adapt to a world of extremes. Every layer, every stitch, every ornament carried meaning, practical, social, and spiritual. From the hunters stalking prey across windswept plains to the shamans performing ritual dances in the flickering firelight, clothing was both a tool and a canvas, a bridge connecting survival, identity, and expression. The garments of the Ice Age speak to us across millennia, reminding us that humans have always sought to harmonize with their environment, to express themselves, and to leave a mark upon the world. Even now, as we slip into the warmth of our beds, the lessons of Ice Age fashion adaptability, observation, ingenuity, and creativity remain quietly with us. They whisper of resilience, of art interwoven with necessity, and of the enduring human spirit. Good night, traveler. Rest now, and let the stories of furs, hides, and frozen landscapes lull you into dreams. Until we meet again, on another journey through time, where the past comes alive and history whispers softly through the threads of human experience.